I stood frozen as my future mother-in-law shoved the prenup across the mahogany table, her perfectly manicured nail tapping the signature line. "Sign it, or there's no wedding tomorrow," she hissed. My fiancé Ryan just shrugged from across the room. "Come on, Della, it's just a formality. Stop being dramatic." 24 hours before our wedding, his entire family surrounded me like vultures. They had no idea who my father really was. They had no idea what was coming. The grandfather clock in the Whitmore Estates study chimed 8 times each note, feeling like a hammer against my chest. I had arrived at their mansion expecting to finalize seating arrangements and maybe share a glass of champagne with my soon-to-be family. Instead, I found myself trapped in what felt like a corporate boardroom ambush. Harold Whitmore sat at the head of the polished table, his gray eyes calculating behind wire-rimmed glasses. To his right, Margaret perched with the posture of someone who'd never relaxed a day in her life, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it stretched her features. Their son, Marcus Ryan's older brother, flanked his father's left side briefcase, open fountain pen, ready. Even Stephanie Ryan's younger sister had positioned herself strategically by the door, blocking my only exit. "We should have done this months ago," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But better late than never, right, dear?" 3 lawyers I'd never seen before sat along one side of the table, their suits identical in their expensive blandness. The one in the middle, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, slid a document toward me. The weight of it hit the table with a thud that made me flinch. 50 pages. I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Thoroughness is a Whitmore family trait." Harold said, his tone suggesting this was something I should admire. "We've built our department store empire on attention to detail." I looked across the room at Ryan, who leaned against his father's bookshelf scrolling through his phone. This wasn't the man who'd brought me wildflowers just because they reminded him of my smile. This wasn't the person who'd spent hours learning to cook my grandmother's lasagna recipe. This stranger wore Ryan's face, but none of his warmth. "Ryan," I said his name like a question, hoping to find the man I fell in love with somewhere behind those indifferent eyes. He glanced up briefly. "Just sign it, Della. Everyone in our circle does this. It protects both of us." "Protects both of us," I repeated, flipping through pages filled with legal terminology designed to intimidate. "This says, I get nothing if we divorce, not even wedding gifts from my side of the family." "Why would you be thinking about divorce the night before your wedding?" Stephanie piped up from her guardian position. "Unless you're planning something." The accusation hung in the air like smog. I continued reading each page, revealing new depths of their distrust. No claim to joint bank accounts, no rights to any property purchased during marriage, limited access to credit cards. It was less a prenuptial agreement and more a financial prison sentence. This clause here, I pointed to a section near the middle, my hand trembling slightly. It says any children would remain in primary custody of the Whitmore family should our marriage dissolve. Marcus cleared his throat, his lawyer voice taking over. "Standard language for protecting family interests. The Whitmore legacy must be preserved." "Children aren't legacy pieces," I said, heat rising in my cheeks. "They're not assets to be divided like stock portfolios." "How dramatic." Margaret sighed, examining her nails. "This is exactly why we need these protections. You're too emotional for business matters." The lawyers nodded in unison like synchronized swimmers of legal manipulation. The woman in the middle tapped her pen against the signature page. "Ms. Romano, the wedding is in 18 hours. Vendors have been paid. Guests have traveled from across the country. This is merely a formality." "A formality that ensures I have no rights in my own marriage," I countered. Harold leaned forward, his cologne overwhelming in its intensity. "Let's be frank, young lady. You're a charity event coordinator who lives in a studio apartment. My son is heir to a retail dynasty. This arrangement is more than fair considering what you're gaining by joining our family." The words stung precisely because they were calculated to wound. They'd researched me, reduced my life to bullet points that emphasized what I lacked rather than who I was. "I've never asked Ryan for money," I said quietly. "I've never even let him pay my rent." "Which is admirable," Margaret conceded, with a tone that suggested it was anything but. "However, marriage changes people. We've seen it happen too many times in our social circle. Sweet girls become calculating women once they have access to family funds." Ryan finally put down his phone and walked over, but instead of coming to my side, he stood behind his mother's chair. "Della, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the papers so we can get back to celebrating. The rehearsal dinner guests will be arriving soon." I stared at him, searching for any sign of the man who'd held me during thunderstorms, who'd surprised me with picnics in the park, who'd said he loved me for my kind heart and generous spirit. This Ryan looked at me like I was a business transaction refusing to close. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Margaret's mask of politeness finally slipped completely. "Then there's no wedding. Simple as that. We'll tell everyone you got cold feet. Ryan will be portrayed as the heartbroken groom. You'll be the gold digger who ran when she couldn't get her hands on Whitmore money." "That's not fair," I protested. "I love Ryan." "Then prove it," Harold challenged. "Sign the agreement and show us your love isn't about money." The twisted logic made my head spin. Somehow, they'd framed their own greed as a test of my character. I looked around the room at faces that would supposedly become my family tomorrow. Each one wore the same expression of smug certainty, convinced they'd trapped someone beneath their station trying to climb above her place. Marcus shuffled papers with practiced efficiency. "There's also a confidentiality clause. Anything discussed within the Whitmore family stays within the Whitmore family. Violation results in significant financial penalties." "You mean I can't even talk to my own family about my life?" I asked, incredulous. "Your family," Stephanie said with undisguised disdain, "consists of a father you claim is too busy to attend the wedding and some cousins from New Jersey. I hardly think they'll be concerned with Whitmore business dealings." If only they knew the truth about my father. William Sterling hadn't built his technology empire by being too busy for his only daughter. I'd been the one to insist on a small private ceremony, wanting to be loved as Della Romano, not as the Sterling heiress. Now surrounded by wolves dressed in designer clothing, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The prenuptial agreement seemed to grow heavier as I reached the final pages. There, in bold letters, were clauses about my behavior during marriage. No unauthorized charitable donations over $500. No employment decisions without family approval. Even stipulations about which social events I could attend alone. It wasn't just about money. They wanted to control every aspect of my existence. "This isn't a marriage contract," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "It's an ownership deed." Ryan finally showed emotion, but it was irritation rather than concern. "God, Della, why do you have to be so difficult? Everyone here signed similar agreements. Tell her Marcus." His brother nodded. "My wife Madison understood it was just good business sense. She signed without all this theater." I'd met Madison exactly twice. Both times she'd had the glassy smile of someone who'd learned not to have opinions. Is that what they expected me to become? Another Whitmore wife, decorative and silent. The lawyers began murmuring about time constraints and legal filing deadlines. Margaret stood smoothing her dress with hands that sparkled with diamonds, probably worth more than I'd make in a lifetime. "I'll make this simple," she announced. "You have two choices. Sign the agreement now and marry my son tomorrow, joining a family that will elevate you beyond your wildest dreams. Or refuse and walk out of here with nothing but the embarrassment of a canceled wedding and a reputation in tatters." "You're forgetting a third option," I said quietly. Harold scoffed, "Which is, I sign it now and deal with the consequences later," I replied, picking up the pen. The room erupted in satisfied murmurs. Ryan even smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. They thought they'd won, broken me down with their collective pressure and veiled threats. None of them noticed as I carefully signed my name, making sure to transpose two letters in a way that would invalidate the entire document. Years of reviewing event contracts had taught me that details matter, and the Whitmores weren't the only ones who could pay attention to them. "There," I said, pushing the papers back across the table. Satisfied? Margaret's smile could have curdled milk. "Welcome to the family, dear. Try not to embarrass us tomorrow." As Marcus collected the documents, filing them away with bureaucratic precision, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Without looking, I knew it was my father checking in. He'd be expecting my usual goodnight text, the one I'd sent every evening since my mother passed away 10 years ago. Tonight that message would be very different. "Now," Harold announced, standing with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Let's join the rehearsal dinner. Remember, Della, you're a Whitmore now. Act accordingly." I nodded, already planning my next move. They thought they'd captured a mouse, unaware they'd actually caged themselves with a lioness who'd learned patience from the best. My father hadn't built his empire by rolling over when challenged, and he hadn't raised his daughter to do so either. Ryan offered his arm as we walked toward the dining room, playing the loving fiancé now that I'd supposedly surrendered. "See, that wasn't so hard. Tomorrow all this unpleasantness will be forgotten." I smiled at him, the kind of smile I'd perfected during years of dealing with difficult donors at charity events. "You're right. Tomorrow will definitely be unforgettable." Behind us, I heard Margaret instructing the staff to set up for arriving guests. The Whitmores were preparing to celebrate their victory, certain they'd secured their son's financial future by crushing my spirit. They had no idea that in their arrogance, they'd just provided me with everything I needed to expose who they really were. As we entered the lavishly decorated dining room filled with flowers worth more than most people's monthly salaries, I caught sight of myself in a gilded mirror. The woman staring back didn't look broken or defeated. She looked like someone who'd finally seen the truth and decided to do something about it. The rehearsal dinner would go on as planned. I'd smile and nod and play the part of the grateful bride-to-be. But tomorrow, when they expected me to walk down that aisle as their conquered prize, they'd learn that some women refuse to be bought, sold, or controlled. They'd learn that love without respect is just possession, and I was nobody's property. The first guests began arriving, air-kissing and congratulating the happy couple. I accepted their well wishes graciously, all while mentally composing the text I'd send my father the moment I could escape to privacy. The Whitmores thought they'd won by forcing my signature on their document. They had no idea the war had just begun. 2 years before this nightmare in the Whitmore study, I'd been living a completely different life. As I stood in that rehearsal dinner surrounded by faces that viewed me as an interloper, my mind drifted back to the beginning. How had I gone from organizing charity galas to being cornered into signing my life away? It started at the Harbor Foundation's annual fundraiser for children's literacy. I'd spent 6 months coordinating every detail from securing the waterfront venue to arranging for local authors to read to kids during the afternoon session. The evening gala was my pride and joy, featuring silent auctions and performances that would raise enough money to fund mobile libraries for 3 counties. That night, I wore a simple black dress I'd found at a consignment shop paired with my mother's pearl earrings. I wasn't there to impress anyone with fashion. I was there to ensure every dollar possible went to getting books into tiny hands that needed them. "Excuse me," a warm voice said behind me as I adjusted one of the auction displays. "Are you the miracle worker who put this all together?" I turned to find a man with sandy brown hair and the kind of smile that seemed genuinely interested rather than professionally polished. He wore his tuxedo like it was comfortable rather than required, and his green eyes held actual warmth. "I'm the event coordinator," I replied, straightening a bid sheet, though miracle worker might be overstating it. "I don't think so," he said, gesturing around the transformed ballroom. "My family's foundation has been to dozens of these things, and this is the first one that actually feels like it's about the cause, rather than just seeing and being seen." That should have been my first clue. Family foundation. Dozens of events. But I was distracted by the way he actually looked at the displays showing the children who would benefit from the fundraiser, how he read the testimonials from teachers in underfunded schools. "I'm Ryan Whitmore," he said, extending his hand. "Della Romano." I replied, shaking it briefly before turning back to my work. If you'll excuse me, the auction starts in 20 minutes and I need to check with the auctioneer. Most wealthy donors expected attention and fawning. Ryan simply nodded and said, "Would you maybe have coffee with me sometime? When you're not saving the world through perfectly executed events?" His self-deprecating humor caught me off guard. I dealt with enough entitled rich men at these functions to have my walls firmly in place, but something about his approach felt different, genuine even. "I don't date donors," I said automatically. "Good policy," he agreed. "How about breakfast then? Completely different meal, totally doesn't count as a date." Despite myself, I laughed. That's the worst loophole logic I've ever heard. "I'm hoping it's just bad enough to work," he admitted with a grin that transformed his face from handsome to approachable. 3 weeks later, after he'd shown up at 5 more charity events just to volunteer at registration tables and help stack chairs afterward, I finally agreed to that breakfast. He chose a tiny diner in my neighborhood rather than some 5-star restaurant, and he actually listened when I talked about my work. "So why event planning for nonprofits?" he asked, adding an alarming amount of sugar to his coffee. "The pay can't be great." "It's not," I admitted, spreading jam on my toast. "But every successful event means more kids get books, or more families get meals, or more shelters get supplies. I guess I like knowing that my organizational skills actually make a difference." He leaned forward, genuinely interested. "But what made you choose this path?" I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. My mom died when I was in college. She was a teacher in an underfunded school, always spending her own money on supplies for kids who had nothing. After she passed, I switched my major from business to nonprofit management. Felt like a way to honor her memory. What I didn't tell him was that my father had offered to buy the entire school district and name it after her. That wasn't Mom's way, and it wasn't mine either. We believed in lifting people up, not making them feel indebted. "She sounds amazing," Ryan said softly. "I think she'd be proud of what you're doing." "Tell me about your family," I redirected, uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. "Oh, you know, standard stuff. Parents run the Whitmore department store chain, lots of charity galas and society pages. Pretty boring, honestly." Another red flag I missed, the way he dismissed his family's business as boring, as if $100 million retail empires were commonplace. But I was charmed by what seemed like modesty, by his apparent disinterest in the wealth that defined him. Over the next few months, Ryan pursued me with a persistence that felt romantic rather than predatory. He learned my coffee order and would leave surprise lattes on my desk during particularly stressful event weeks. He volunteered at every fundraiser, actually rolling up his sleeves and working rather than just writing checks. He even started reading to kids at the literacy program on Saturdays. "You don't have to do this," I told him one afternoon as he struggled through a picture book with a group of entranced 6-year-olds. "I already agreed to be your girlfriend." "Maybe I like it," he said, making silly voices for the characters that sent the children into giggles. "Maybe dating you is making me a better person." I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. The first time I met his family was at a benefit for the Metropolitan Museum. I'd borrowed a dress from a friend and spent an hour watching YouTube tutorials to achieve an elegant updo. Ryan picked me up in his Tesla, whistling appreciatively. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. Though fair warning, my family can be a bit much. That was like saying a hurricane could be a bit windy. Margaret Whitmore took one look at me, and I saw her mentally calculating my net worth based on my shoes and handbag. Harold grilled me about my little job and seemed puzzled when I expressed genuine passion for nonprofit work. Stephanie made cutting remarks disguised as compliments, while Marcus ignored me entirely until he learned I didn't have a trust fund. "Well, she's certainly earnest," I heard Margaret tell Ryan when she thought I was out of earshot. Though I suppose everyone goes through a charitable phase. Ryan found me on the museum's balcony later, tears threatening my carefully applied mascara. "I'm so sorry," he said, pulling me into his arms. "They're horrible snobs. I should have prepared you better." "Do you think I'm just a phase 2?" I asked against his chest. "No," he said firmly, tilting my chin up to meet his eyes. "You're the real thing, Della Romano. You make me want to be better than my trust fund, better than their expectations. You make me want to matter." Looking back, I wonder if he ever meant any of it, or if he was just a better actor than I gave him credit for being. 6 months into our relationship, things shifted subtly. Ryan started making comments about my apartment, wondering why I insisted on living in a cramped studio when he had plenty of room. He began buying me expensive gifts I didn't need and seemed hurt when I asked him to return them. "I just want to take care of you," he said after I refused a designer handbag that cost more than 3 months of my rent. "Is that such a crime?" "I can take care of myself," I insisted. "That's not why I'm with you." "Then why are you with me?" he asked, and for the first time I heard an edge in his voice that reminded me of his mother. "Because you're kind," I said, trying to recapture our early magic. "Because you volunteer at reading programs and help me set up chairs and treat me like a person instead of a charity case." He softened at that, apologizing and promising to respect my independence. But the gifts kept coming, each refusal met with increasing frustration. The proposal happened at the same harbor where we'd met during the Literacy Foundation's gala, exactly 1 year later. I was in the middle of introducing the keynote speaker when Ryan walked onto the stage, black velvet box in hand. "Della Romano," he said into the microphone, dropping to one knee as the crowd gasped. "You've changed my life in every possible way. Will you marry me?" 500 donors and supporters waited for my answer. Cameras flashed. In the audience, I spotted Margaret's satisfied smile and Harold's approving nod. They'd orchestrated this public proposal knowing I couldn't say no without humiliating their son in front of the city's philanthropic elite. "Yes." I whispered the word, feeling extracted rather than offered. The crowd erupted in applause. Ryan slipped the ring onto my finger, a massive diamond that felt heavy with expectation. As he kissed me for the cameras, I caught sight of someone in the back of the room, a woman with sleek blonde hair and predatory eyes, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Who's that?" I asked Ryan later, nodding toward the blonde, who seemed to be shadowing us at the reception. "Oh, that's just Brittany," he said casually. "Old family friend. She actually helped me pick out your ring." Another warning sign I rationalized away. Why would an old family friend help choose an engagement ring? But I was overwhelmed by the sudden tsunami of wedding planning, with Margaret inserting herself into every decision. A spring wedding at the estate. She announced the week after the proposal. The Whitmore brides always marry at the estate. I was thinking maybe a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, I suggested, somewhere meaningful to us. Margaret's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Darling, Whitmore weddings are never small. We have obligations to consider. Business associates, society connections. This isn't just about you." That became the theme of our engagement. Nothing was just about me or even about us. Every decision served the Whitmore image, from the designer dress I didn't want to the 7-course menu I found excessive. Ryan, who'd once eaten burgers with me at food trucks, suddenly cared deeply about wine pairings and flower arrangements. "It's just 1 day," he said whenever I protested. "Let Mom have her perfect wedding. We'll have our whole lives to do things our way." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Because if this was who Ryan really was, if the sweet volunteer who read picture books had been the act, then what did that make me a fool who'd fallen for a performance, who'd given her heart to someone who only existed in carefully staged moments? 2 months before the wedding, I made a decision. I called my father from the roof of my building, the only place I could be sure of privacy. "Daddy, I'm getting married," I said without preamble. "Congratulations, sweetheart." William Sterling's voice was warm but cautious. "Do I know the lucky man?" "No, and that's on purpose. I've kept him away from anything Sterling related. His name is Ryan Whitmore." There was a long pause. "Harold Whitmore's son—" My stomach dropped. "You know his father?" "We have history," my father said carefully. "Della, are you happy? Truly happy?" I looked out over the city at the lights that represented millions of lives and dreams. I thought I was. Now I'm not sure. They're very focused on their image, on their wealth. Nothing like how we were raised. Do you want me to have him investigated? My father offered. It would be discreet. No, I said quickly. I want to believe I can judge someone's character on my own. I just wanted you to know in case... In case what, princess? In case I need you, I admitted. The wedding is in 2 months, May 15th at their estate in the Hamptons. I'm not sending you an invitation because I don't want them to know who you are. Is that terrible? That's strategic, he corrected gently. Your mother and I didn't raise you to be anybody's trophy. If this boy deserves you, he'll love Della Romano, the event planner. But if you need me, princess, you call. Day or night, I'll be there. I love you, Daddy. I love you too. And Della, trust your instincts. They're telling you something isn't right for a reason. I wish I'd listened. Instead, I pushed down my doubts and threw myself into my work, taking on extra events to avoid thinking about the growing distance between Ryan and me. He spent more time at his family's offices, learning the business he'd claimed to find boring. He canceled our Saturday reading sessions, saying he needed to golf with potential investors. The man who'd charmed me with his normalcy disappeared, replaced by someone who looked at me like an acquisition. 3 weeks before the wedding, Brittany started appearing at every venue meeting and dress fitting. She had opinions on everything from the bridesmaid dresses to the reception timeline, always prefaced with, "When I plan events for the Whitmores." I don't understand why she's so involved. I finally told Ryan after Brittany vetoed my choice of wedding favors. This is our wedding, not hers. She's just trying to help, Ryan said, not looking up from his phone. She knows what works for our kind of people. Our kind of people, I repeated. What kind is that? He finally met my eyes, and for a moment I saw something cold there. The kind who understand that image matters. The kind who don't insist on serving food truck appetizers at a Whitmore wedding. You love those food trucks, I reminded him. You said they were authentic and fun. That was before, he said simply. Before what? Before you agreed to marry me. Things are different now, Della. You need to understand that. I did understand. I understood that I'd been a project for him, a way to rebel against his family, until they'd reeled him back in. I understood that the Ryan I'd fallen in love with might have been real, but he wasn't strong enough to resist becoming the Whitmore heir they'd groomed him to be. The night before they ambushed me with the prenup, I'd actually felt hopeful. Ryan had surprised me by stopping by my apartment with Chinese takeout just like our early days. I've missed this, he said, eating lo mein straight from the container. Just us, no pressure, no expectations. We could have this all the time, I suggested carefully. Maybe get a small place of our own instead of moving into the estate's guest house, somewhere that's ours. His chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. You know that's not possible. The guest house has been prepared. It's tradition. Your family has a lot of traditions, I observed. And now they'll be your traditions too, he said, but it sounded more like a warning than a promise. We watched old movies and he held me like he used to, whispering apologies for being distant. Wedding stress. He blamed it on. Tomorrow night after the rehearsal dinner, everything will be perfect. You'll see. 24 hours later, sitting in that study with a prenup that reduced me to nothing, I finally saw clearly. The Chinese takeout hadn't been nostalgia. It had been a farewell to the fantasy he'd created. The man who'd volunteered at literacy programs and valued authentic connections had been as much a character as any in those picture books he'd read. As the rehearsal dinner swirled around me, Brittany appeared at my elbow with a champagne flute and a smile sharp enough to cut. Feeling overwhelmed, she asked sweetly. Don't worry, once you understand your place in all this, it gets easier. I've been watching the Whitmores manage their wives for years. Is that what you are? I asked. Their manager? Her laugh was crystalline and cold. I'm whatever they need me to be, and after tomorrow you will be too. That's how it works in our world. This isn't my world, I said quietly. No, she agreed, her smile never wavering. But you signed up for it, literally. I should know. I helped draft those custody clauses. Can't have Whitmore heirs raised by someone who might teach them about charity and feelings. The cruelty was so casual, so matter-of-fact that it took my breath away. These people didn't just want to control money, they wanted to control love itself to ensure their grandchildren grew up as cold and calculating as they were. I excused myself, claiming I needed to touch up my lipstick. In the opulent bathroom, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my father. They showed their true colors, prenup signed under duress, invalid signature. Will you come tomorrow? His response was immediate. Already planned on it. Wear mom's pearl necklace. I'll know when you need me. I stared at my reflection in the mirror at the designer dress Margaret had insisted on for the rehearsal at the massive engagement ring that felt more like a shackle than a symbol of love. Tomorrow, everyone would expect to see Della Romano transformed into a Whitmore wife. They had no idea they were about to meet Della Sterling instead. Back at the rehearsal dinner, the atmosphere had shifted into something more predatory. I noticed how the Whitmore family and their closest associates had formed a subtle circle around me like wolves who'd already decided how to divide their prey. Margaret clinked her crystal glass, commanding the room's attention. Before we continue with tonight's festivities, I wanted to say a few words about the newest addition to our family. I forced a smile, knowing whatever came next would be carefully crafted to remind me of my place. Della comes to us from humble beginnings. Margaret began her tone, suggesting this was something to be overlooked rather than admired. But we Whitmores have always believed in elevation, in bringing people up to our level, so to speak. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. I caught the eye of one of the catering staff, a young woman about my age, who gave me a sympathetic look before quickly glancing away. Of course, such elevation requires certain adjustments, Margaret continued. I'm sure Della understands that her little charity job will need to be reconsidered. Whitmore wives have important roles to play and they can't be distracted by... She paused, searching for the words, hobbies. It's not a hobby, I said, my voice carrying more than intended. It's my career. The room fell silent. Harold set down his whiskey glass with deliberate slowness. Careers are what one has when one needs money dear, he said, each word dripping condescension. You'll be a Whitmore. The only career you'll need is supporting Ryan and raising the next generation properly. Properly, I echoed. You mean like turning them into people who see others as beneath them? Stephanie laughed high and false. Oh, she's got spirit. Remember when Madison had Spirit Marcus? Marcus's wife stood across the room, her expression completely blank. Fingers wrapped so tightly around her glass, I thought it might shatter. When our eyes met, she looked away quickly, but not before I saw something that might have been a warning. Speaking of the next generation, Harold boomed clearly, trying to regain control. I trust you both understand the importance of continuing the Whitmore line quickly. We're not getting any younger and succession planning is crucial. Dad, Ryan said with what sounded like embarrassment but might have been annoyance. Can we not discuss this here? Why not? Margaret asked. Everyone in this room has a vested interest in the Whitmore legacy. They should know that we expect grandchildren within the first 2 years. 3 would be ideal, all raised with proper values, of course. Of course, Brittany chimed in from beside Marcus. That's why the custody provisions in the prenup are so detailed. Can't have any confusion about how Whitmore children should be raised. I looked at her more closely, noticing details I'd missed before. The way she stood slightly too close to Marcus despite Madison being in the room, the proprietary way she touched his arm when she spoke, the small satisfied smile when Madison flinched at the contact. You seem very invested in the family's legal matters, I observed, for an old family friend. Brittany's smile sharpened. Oh, I'm much more than that. I've been part of the Whitmore inner circle since Ryan and I dated in college. Some bonds don't break just because people move on to other options. The revelation hung in the air like a challenge. I turned to Ryan, who suddenly found his cufflinks fascinating. You dated? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Ancient history, Ryan mumbled. Brittany's been invaluable to the family business since then." "Invaluable," Margaret repeated with approval. She understands how things work, understands loyalty and discretion, qualities we hope to instill in all our family members. The threat was barely veiled: conform or be replaced by someone who would. I wondered how many other women had stood where I was standing, been given the same ultimatum, made the same choice to either submit or flee. A server approached with a silver tray of champagne flutes, and I took one, gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. That's when Marcus decided to share another revelation. "You know, Della, you should be flattered by all our precautions," he said, gesturing with his own glass. "We don't go to these lengths for just anyone. The private investigator we hired said you were frustratingly clean. No debts, no scandals, no secret vices. Just that little apartment and your charity work. You had me investigated." I set down my champagne, untouched, my hand surprisingly steady. "Standard procedure," Harold said dismissively. "Though I must say your investigator did miss some rather glaring details about your background. We couldn't even find information about your father beyond a name, and the fact that he's apparently too busy to attend his only daughter's wedding." If only they knew that William Sterling had built his tech empire by being 10 steps ahead of everyone else, including private investigators. He'd helped me create a perfectly legitimate but limited paper trail years ago, knowing I wanted to make my own way in the world. "My father values his privacy," I said simply, "and he trusts me to make my own decisions." "How progressive," Margaret said with a sniff. "Well, he'll have to make an appearance eventually. We can't have people thinking you materialized from nowhere." "Speaking of mysteries," Stephanie interjected, holding up her phone, "I've been trying to find you on social media all evening. It's like you don't exist online. Who doesn't have Instagram these days?" "Someone who values real connections over digital ones," I replied. The room seemed to tighten around me. They didn't like mysteries, didn't like things they couldn't investigate and categorize and control. Well, Harold announced, "Regardless of your unusual background, you're here now, and tomorrow you'll be one of us, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails." "Responsibilities like signing away my rights?" I asked, tired of dancing around the truth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several guests suddenly became very interested in their appetizers. Margaret's voice could have frozen hellfire. "Rights are earned, not given. You're earning yours by marrying into this family. The prenup simply ensures everyone knows their place." "And what exactly is my place?" I asked, meeting her glacial stare. "Silent and grateful," she replied without missing a beat. "Supportive and fertile. Presentable, but not attention-seeking. Is that really so difficult to understand?" "What's difficult to understand," I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me, "is why your son would claim to love someone you clearly see as beneath you." "Love." Harold laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Is that what he told you this was about? My dear girl Whitmore, men don't marry for love. They marry for advantage, for legacy, for the good of the family name." I looked at Ryan, waiting for him to protest, to show some sign of the man who'd once told me I made him want to be better. But he just stood there, jaw clenched, staring at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "Nothing to say?" I asked him directly. "What's there to say?" he replied, finally meeting my eyes. "You signed the papers. It's done. Tomorrow we get married and all this drama becomes irrelevant." "Does it though?" I asked. "Or does it just become our life? Me being constantly reminded that I'm not good enough, that I should be grateful for being elevated to your level." "See, this is exactly why we need the prenup," Stephanie said to the room at large. "The attitude, the defiance. Imagine if we hadn't protected ourselves." Madison Whitmore chose that moment to speak for the first time all evening. "The prenup doesn't protect anyone," she said quietly. "It just makes the cage visible from the start." The room went deathly silent. Marcus turned on his wife with a look that made me step back instinctively. "Madison, you've had too much champagne," he said, each word precise and cold. "I've had exactly one glass," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. Just like I'm allowed. Just like everything else in my life is measured and monitored and controlled. Madison. Margaret's voice held a warning that seemed to shrink the other woman back into herself. Perhaps you should go lie down. You're clearly overwhelmed. As Madison was escorted out by Brittany, who whispered something in her ear that drained the remaining color from her face, I understood exactly what my future held if I went through with this wedding. Well, Harold said, clapping his hands as if to dispel the uncomfortable moment. I think it's time we discuss the final arrangements for tomorrow. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than my hands, I need some air, if you'll excuse me. Running away already. Brittany had returned, sliding back into her position at Marcus's side. The ceremony isn't until tomorrow. I'm not running, I said, looking directly at Ryan. I'm just taking a moment to think about what I'm walking into. You're walking into a life most women would kill for... Margaret snapped, her patience clearly exhausted. The Whitmore name opens every door in this city. Our charitable foundation donates millions. You could oversee it all from a comfortable distance, playing Lady Bountiful without getting your hands dirty with actual work. Getting my hands dirty is what I do, I said. It's who I am. No. Harold corrected, his voice hard as granite. Who you are is who we tell you to be. That's what you agreed to when you signed those papers. Papers can be challenged, I said quietly. Signatures can be invalidated. The room erupted. Harold's face turned an alarming shade of red. Margaret actually gasped. Marcus started shouting about breach of contract and financial penalties. But it was Ryan's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend us. He just shook his head like I was a child having a tantrum. This is exactly why we needed the prenup, he said to his father. I told you she'd be difficult about it. You told him... I stared at the stranger wearing my fiancé's face. This whole thing was planned. Ryan shrugged, the gesture so casual it felt like a slap. Not planned exactly, but anticipated. You're stubborn, Della. It's cute when it's about charity events, less cute when it's about real life. Real life. I laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. None of this is real. This whole family is built on performance and control. Control is how empires survive, Harold said. Something your absent father clearly never taught you. I thought of my father, who'd built his empire on innovation and treating people with respect, who'd never once made my mother feel lesser for being a teacher instead of a CEO, who'd raised me to value integrity over income. My father taught me plenty, I said, including when to recognize a bad deal. The deal is done, Margaret said flatly. Unless you're prepared to face social ruin and financial penalties that would bankrupt someone of your means. Now I suggest you compose yourself and remember that in less than 24 hours, you'll be representing the Whitmore name. I looked around the room at the faces watching this unfold. Some seemed sympathetic but unwilling to intervene. Others looked entertained, like this was dinner theater. Most just seemed relieved it wasn't them in the hot seat. You know what? I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. You're right. The deal is done. Victory flashed across their faces, but I wasn't finished. But not the deal you think. The deal where I agreed to marry Ryan because I loved him because I thought he loved me. That deal is definitely done. You're being melodramatic, Ryan said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. No, I said, backing toward the door. I'm being clear-sighted for the first time in months. You want a wife who'll sign anything, accept anything, become anything you demand. That's not me. That will never be me. Where do you think you're going? Stephanie called out. The wedding is tomorrow. Everything's been paid for. People are coming from around the world. Then I guess you better figure out how to explain my absence, I said, my hand on the door handle. You walk out that door, Harold thundered, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. No one crosses the Whitmore family, no one. I paused, looking back at them all. The men who thought money meant ownership. The women who'd traded their souls for designer handbags and empty titles. the ex-girlfriend lurking in the shadows waiting to take my place. "You want to know the truth?" I asked, addressing the room at large. "The Whitmore family isn't nearly as powerful as they think they are. Money without morals is just paper. Legacy without love is just a mausoleum with a trust fund." "Get out," Margaret hissed. "Get out and don't come back. We'll tell everyone you had a breakdown, that we tried to help, but you were too unstable for marriage." "Tell them whatever you want," I said. "But tomorrow, when your guests arrive expecting a wedding, you might want to have a better story ready." I opened the door, but Ryan's voice stopped me. "Della, wait. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Where will you even go? You can't afford to break the contract." I turned back one last time, seeing him clearly for who he'd always been. Not evil exactly, just weak. Too weak to stand up to his family, too weak to choose love over legacy, too weak to be the man he'd pretended to be. "That's the difference between us, Ryan," I said. "You think everything is about what people can afford. I know some things are too expensive even when they're free." I walked out of the Whitmore estate with nothing but my purse and my dignity. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices, the scramble to control the narrative, the fury of people who'd never been defied. But I didn't run. I walked steadily to my car, got in, and drove away. Only when I was safely back in the city did I pull over and call my father. "Daddy," I said when he answered on the first ring, "change of plans. I need you at the wedding tomorrow after all." "What happened, Princess?" "They showed me who they really are, all of them, and they have no idea who we really are." There was a pause, then my father's voice calm and certain. "Then tomorrow they learn. Wear your mother's pearls, sweetheart. She always said they brought out your strength." "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too. Now go home and get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day." As I drove back to my small apartment, I thought about the prenup with my deliberately invalid signature, about the Whitmore's certainty that they'd trapped me, about Ryan's assumption that I had nowhere else to turn. They thought they knew everything about me. They'd investigated my present, but never questioned why someone might choose to hide their past. Tomorrow, when they expected me to either crumble or comply, they'd learn that sometimes the mouse they thought they'd cornered was actually a lion who'd chosen to purr. The Whitmores had spent the evening trying to put me in my place. Tomorrow, I'd show them exactly where I belonged, standing tall, speaking truth, and watching their house of cards collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. I sat in my car outside my apartment building for a full 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be about finalizing seating charts and toasting to our future. Instead, it had been an ambush designed to break me down and reshape me into their image of a proper Whitmore wife. My phone buzzed with text after text. Ryan, Margaret, even Stephanie. I didn't read any of them. Instead, I climbed the 4 flights to my studio apartment, kicked off the designer heels Margaret had insisted I wear, and sank onto my secondhand couch. The space was small, but mine. Every piece of furniture had a story, from the bookshelf I'd rescued from a garage sale to the kitchen table where I'd planned dozens of fundraising events. This was my life built by my own hands, and they wanted me to abandon it for a guest house on their estate where my every move would be monitored. I reached for my phone, scrolling past the increasingly frantic messages from the Whitmore clan, and pulled up my father's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. Once I told him everything, there would be no going back. William Sterling didn't do anything halfway. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice filled my ear. "Della, it's late, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" "No." I admitted, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "Actually, nothing is all right. Can you talk?" "For you, always. Give me a moment." I heard him excuse himself from whatever meeting or event he'd been attending, then the sound of a door closing. "Okay, Princess. Tell me what's happened." I started from the beginning, from the ambush in the study to the prenup that would strip me of everything, from Ryan's cold indifference to his mother's casual cruelty. I told him about Brittany, the ex-girlfriend who'd helped draft the custody clauses, about Madison's hollow eyes, about Harold's threats. My father listened without interrupting, though I could practically feel his anger building through the phone. When I finished, the silence stretched for several long moments. "You said you signed it," he finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. "With an invalid signature," I confirmed. "I transposed 2 letters in my last name. It would never hold up in court, but they didn't notice." A sound that might have been a proud chuckle came through the phone. That's my smart girl, always thinking 3 steps ahead. "I learned from the best," I said, managing a small smile. "Daddy, there's something else. Harold Whitmore claimed they had me investigated, but they found nothing about you except your name. They think you're just some absent father too busy to care about his daughter's wedding." "Good. Let them think that." His voice had taken on the edge I recognized from his business dealings. "Della, I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you love this boy?" I closed my eyes, thinking of Ryan as he'd been in the beginning. The volunteer who read stories with silly voices, the man who brought me coffee during stressful events, the person who'd claimed I made him want to be better. "I loved who I thought he was," I said finally, "but that person might never have existed. Tonight, when his family attacked me, he just stood there. He told them he'd anticipated I'd be difficult about the prenup, like my having self-respect was an inconvenience to manage. And the family themselves, I searched for the right words. They're everything you and Mom taught me not to be. Cruel, entitled. They see people as possessions, marriages as mergers. They actually said Whitmore men don't marry for love, only for advantage. Harold Whitmore said that." There was something in my father's voice I couldn't quite identify. How remarkably honest of him. Tell me, did he happen to mention anything about the origins of their fortune? "No, just lots of talk about legacy and dynasty. Why?" My father sighed, and I could picture him in his office looking out over the city he'd helped transform through technology and innovation. "It's time I told you a story, Princess. About 30 years ago, before you were born, I had an idea for revolutionizing retail through integrated supply chain technology. I was young, idealistic, and I made the mistake of trusting the wrong person." My blood ran cold. Harold Whitmore. We were both starting out. I had the ideas. He had a small family department store and big ambitions. We shook hands on a partnership. I showed him everything. The algorithms, the logistics systems, the customer prediction models. 2 weeks later, he filed patents on all of it under his name. When I confronted him, he laughed, said I should have gotten it in writing that handshakes were for suckers. "Oh my God," I breathed. "That's how they built their empire, on your work." My work was the foundation. Their cruelty and business acumen did the rest. His voice was matter of fact, but I knew him well enough to hear the old hurt underneath. "I learned my lesson, built my own empire in tech, met your mother, had you. I thought I'd put the Whitmores behind me, but the universe has a sense of humor, it seems." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. "Because I wanted you to form your own opinions about people, not carry my grudges. And honestly, I never imagined you'd cross paths with them. You've always moved in completely different circles." "Until Ryan came slumming at a charity event," I said bitterly. "Don't do that," my father said gently. "Don't blame yourself for having an open heart. That's your mother in you, and it's one of your best qualities. The fact that they took advantage of it says everything about them and nothing about you." I felt tears prick my eyes. What do I do now? They're expecting me to show up tomorrow and marry Ryan. If I don't, they'll destroy my reputation. They've already threatened to paint me as a gold digger who ran when she couldn't get their money. "What do you want to do?" he asked, which was so typically him. Even now, he was letting me choose my own path. "Part of me wants to just disappear," I admitted. "Let them say whatever they want and start fresh somewhere else." And the other part, I thought about Madison's dead eyes, about other women who might fall into the Whitmore trap, about the arrogance of people who thought money gave them the right to own others. The other part wants them to know they picked the wrong person to bully, that they can't just purchase people and discard them when they don't comply. "That's my girl," my father said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Now tell me about tomorrow. What's the timeline? Ceremony is at 4 in the afternoon. Garden wedding at their estate in the Hamptons. About 300 guests, all their society friends and business associates. Perfect. A nice public venue with plenty of witnesses. He paused and I could practically hear him thinking. Della, I need you to listen very carefully. Tomorrow you're going to get dressed and go to that wedding as planned. What, Daddy, I can't marry him. I didn't say marry him. I said go to the wedding. Wear your mother's pearls, the ones I gave her on our wedding day. When you need me, touch them and I'll know. You'll be there. Hope bloomed in my chest. Oh, I'll be there. Along with a few friends who've been very interested in the Whitmore family's business practices over the years. You see, Princess, while Harold was building his empire on stolen ideas, he cut quite a few corners, made enemies. Some of those chickens are ready to come home to roost. What kind of chickens? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. The legal kind. The kind that have been waiting 30 years for justice. His voice hardened. But more importantly, I want to see Harold's face when he realizes exactly who you are. When he understands that he tried to do to my daughter what he did to me all those years ago. They'll be furious, I warned. Good. Fury makes people sloppy, and Harold Whitmore has been sloppy for years. He's just been rich enough to cover it up, until now. We talked for another hour, my father outlining exactly what would happen tomorrow. He'd already made calls, set things in motion. The Whitmore family thought they'd cornered a nobody, a charity worker with no resources and no options. Daddy, I said as we prepared to hang up. What about Ryan? He's weak and entitled, but he's not evil like his parents. Ryan made his choice when he stood by and let them attack you, when he dismissed your feelings as overreaction. He's a grown man, Della, not a child. He chose his family's money over your heart. I know. It still hurts, though. Of course it does. You loved who you thought he was. Grieve that person, but don't waste tears on who he actually is. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the wedding dress hanging on the back of my closet door. Margaret had chosen it, of course. A designer creation that cost more than I made in 6 months, designed to showcase the Whitmore wealth rather than flatter me. My phone continued to buzz. Finally, I looked at the messages. Ryan, Della, stop being childish. Come back and we'll sort this out. Margaret, your behavior tonight was unacceptable. Be at the estate by 10 a.m. tomorrow for hair and makeup. Stephanie, hope you're happy. You've ruined everything. Brittany is here helping us figure out damage control. I deleted them all without responding. Then I saw one from a number I didn't recognize. This is Madison. I know you don't know me well, but please be careful tomorrow. They're planning something. Brittany was in Harold's office for an hour after you left. My blood ran cold. I texted back, what kind of something? Her response came quickly. I don't know, but I heard your name and the word insurance. Della, whatever you do, don't come alone tomorrow. I smiled grimly. If only she knew that William Sterling's daughter was never truly alone. My father had built an empire on staying 10 steps ahead of his competition. Tomorrow, the Whitmores would learn what it meant to play chess with someone who'd been setting up the board since before they even knew there was a game. I pulled my mother's pearl necklace from its velvet box, running my fingers over the smooth spheres. She'd worn these when she married my father, when they'd promised to build a life based on love and respect rather than money and power. Tomorrow I'd wear them as armor and signal both. The Whitmores had given me an ultimatum sign, my life away or face ruin. They thought those were my only options because they couldn't imagine someone having resources they couldn't see or control. Tomorrow they'd learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who appears to have nothing left to lose. I returned to the estate despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The valet took my car keys with the same practiced efficiency as before, but something in his eyes suggested he'd heard about the scene at dinner. News traveled fast in the Whitmore ecosystem. The house felt different now, like a beautiful trap designed to slowly squeeze the life out of anyone who entered. The marble gleamed too bright, the portraits judged too harshly, and the silence felt heavy with expectation. There you are. Margaret materialized from the shadows like a well-dressed specter. "We've put your things in the blue guest room. You'll stay here tonight, of course. Can't have you getting cold feet again." "I'm not staying here," I said, but she was already walking away, expecting me to follow like an obedient dog. "Don't be ridiculous. Everything for tomorrow is here. Your dress, your shoes. The hairdresser arrives at 8. Besides," she paused at the foot of the grand staircase, "Ryan is expecting to see you in the morning. You wouldn't want to disappoint him again, would you?" The threat was subtle, but clear. Play along or face consequences. I followed her up the stairs, my footsteps silent on the thick runner that probably cost more than most people's cars. The blue guest room was exactly what I expected, expensively appointed and completely impersonal. My wedding dress hung on the wardrobe door like a ghost of the future I was supposed to inhabit. On the bedside table sat a fountain pen and a fresh copy of the prenuptial agreement. "In case you want to review it again," Margaret said, noticing my gaze, "sometimes a good night's sleep helps people see reason." "I already signed it," I reminded her. "Yes, but did you read it carefully? Every clause, every provision." She moved to the window, adjusting curtains that didn't need adjusting. For instance, the section about communication with outside parties during the marriage. Very detailed, very restrictive. "You mean the part where I can't talk to my own family without permission?" "Your family," she repeated with that special brand of disdain she'd perfected. "Yes, well, we can't have Whitmore business being discussed with outsiders. I'm sure your father, busy as he is, will understand." She left me alone with that parting shot, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded final. I waited until her footsteps faded, then immediately checked the door. Locked from the outside. Of course. But they'd underestimated me. Growing up as William Sterling's daughter meant learning to be resourceful. I examined the windows, painted shut. The connecting bathroom led to another locked door. Even the phone on the bedside table had been disconnected. I sat on the bed pretending to review the prenup while actually studying it properly for the first time. The provisions were even worse than I'd initially realized. Beyond the financial controls and custody arrangements were clauses about my behavior, appearance, and social interactions. I couldn't attend charity events without approval, couldn't maintain friendships with people deemed inappropriate for the Whitmore image, couldn't even choose my own doctors without family consent. It wasn't a marriage contract, it was an ownership document with prettier language. My phone miraculously still had service, but I noticed the battery was draining faster than usual, probably from whatever tracking app they'd installed while I was at dinner. I texted my father quickly, "Locked in guest room at estate. They want me here for morning preparations." His response was immediate, "Security, minimal inside. They're relying on intimidation." "Good, get some rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." I changed into the silk pajamas someone had laid out, Margaret's touch, no doubt, and settled in to wait. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. The doorknob turned slowly and Ryan slipped inside. "You came back," he said, as if this was some kind of romantic gesture rather than imprisonment. "Your mother didn't give me much choice." He sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining distance between us. In the moonlight filtering through the curtains, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. For a moment, I saw glimpses of the man I'd thought I'd fallen in love with. "Della, I know tonight was rough. My family can be intense, but they mean well. They just want to protect what we've built." "Built on what foundation, Ryan?" I asked, thinking of my father's stolen innovations. He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just wondering what's so valuable it requires protecting from someone who loves you." "Loved," he corrected softly. "You said loved, past tense." I didn't deny it. We sat in silence, the weight of our failed relationship settling between us like a third presence. "It didn't have to be this way," he finally said. "If you'd just trusted me, trusted the process, we could have been happy." "Happy like Marcus and Madison?" I asked. She looked thrilled tonight. Ryan's jaw tightened. Madison knew what she was signing up for. She wanted the lifestyle, the status. She got exactly what she bargained for. Is that what you think I wanted? The lifestyle. He studied me with those green eyes that had once made me feel seen. Now they just looked calculating. I don't know what you wanted anymore. You kept so many secrets, like who your father really is. My heart skipped, but I kept my face neutral. My father is a private man who works in tech. That's not a secret. Tech can mean anything. Startup, corporation, government, contracts. He leaned forward slightly. Brittany thinks there's more to your story. She's rarely wrong about people. Brittany seems very invested in our relationship, I observed. Tell me, was she this involved when you dated? Something flickered across his face. That was different. We were young, our families had expectations. It made sense on paper, but there was no real feeling there. Unlike us, I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. Yes, unlike us. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. What we had was real, Della. Or at least it started that way. Before you got stubborn about the prenup, before you started fighting everything my family suggested. I fell in love with a man who read stories to children and valued authentic connections. I said quietly. That man wouldn't have ambushed me with a prenup 24 hours before our wedding. He wouldn't have locked me in a guest room. He wouldn't have stood by while his family tore me apart. Ryan turned from the window, and in the harsh shadows, he looked like a stranger. That man was never going to inherit the Whitmore empire. I had to choose Della, the family, or you. And you chose. I chose reality over fantasy. I chose security over uncertainty. You chose money over love. I finished. Just like your father said, Whitmore men don't marry for love. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. Fair. I laughed, the sound hollow in the elegant prison of a room. Was it fair to let me believe you were different, to pursue me with flowers and volunteer work and promises of building something real together? I meant it at the time, he said defensively. But people grow up, Della. They face reality. The charity work was nice when it was a hobby, but did you really think I'd spend my life reading picture books and organizing bake sales? Each word was another nail in the coffin of our relationship. The man I'd loved had been a costume Ryan wore when it suited him, discarded the moment his family beckoned. I need you to sign the papers properly, he said, gesturing to the fresh copy on the nightstand. Your signature was smudged or something. Legal wants a clean version. So they had noticed. Interesting that they thought I'd simply made a mistake rather than deliberately sabotaged it. I'll think about it, I said. The wedding is in 16 hours, Della. There's nothing to think about. His voice hardened. Sign the papers, walk down the aisle, and we'll have a good life. Fight this, and you'll lose everything. Everything, I asked. What exactly do I have to lose? You've already shown me your family's true colors. You've locked me in a room. You're threatening me if I don't comply. What's left to take? Your reputation, your job, your future in this city. He counted off on his fingers like items on a grocery list. Do you really think any charity will hire someone who publicly humiliated the Whitmore family, who led on their son and then broke his heart for attention? That's not what happened, and you know it. No, but that's what people will believe. My family has spent decades cultivating relationships with every media outlet, every society columnist, every gossip blogger in the state. Your version of events won't matter. I stared at this stranger wearing my former fiancé's face. You'd really do that, destroy my life's work, because I won't sign a paper that makes me your property. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'd rather marry you tomorrow and pretend tonight never happened. But if you force my hand, yes. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family. Your family, I repeated. Tell me, Ryan, when exactly did I stop being considered part of that family? Was it when I questioned the prenup? When I insisted on keeping my job? Or was it always the plan to keep me separate? Controlled, contained. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Breakfast is at 8, he said instead. Mom will have the hairdresser here early. Try to get some sleep. You'll want to look your best tomorrow." He left, and I heard the lock click again. Alone in the suffocating elegance of my prison, I pulled out the prenup and studied it more carefully. That's when I found it buried in subsection after subsection of legal jargon, a clause stating that if the marriage ended due to infidelity on my part, I would owe the Whitmore family $5 million in damages. But infidelity was defined broadly. Any inappropriate relationship, as determined by the family, any emotional attachment deemed threatening to the marriage, even excessive devotion to work or causes outside the family could qualify. It was a trap within a trap. Even if I found a way out of the marriage, they'd manufacture evidence of an affair and bankrupt me. I photographed every page with my dying phone, sending them to my father's secure server. His response was swift. "Unconscionable contract. Would never hold up in court. Stop worrying and get rest." Easy for him to say. He wasn't locked in a room with people who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of destruction. I lay down fully clothed, not trusting the silk pajamas or anything else they'd provided. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood and new secrets. Somewhere in this mansion, Ryan was probably sleeping peacefully, confident he'd put me in my place. Margaret was likely reviewing tomorrow's timeline, ensuring every moment would reinforce their control. Harold might be toasting his success with whiskey that cost more than most people's rent. None of them knew that in a few hours their carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. I found what I was looking for around 3 a.m. when exhaustion made my search of the room desperate. Behind a heavy dresser was an old servant's door painted over, but not sealed. The lock was ancient, the kind you could pick with a hairpin if you knew how. And I knew how. My father had insisted I learn practical skills along with corporate strategy. You never know when knowing how to pick a lock or hotwire a car might save your life, he'd said. I'd laughed at the time, thinking he was paranoid. I blessed his paranoia now as I worked the hairpin into the lock, feeling for the tumblers. It took 15 minutes of careful manipulation, but finally, I heard the sweet click of success. The door opened into a narrow hallway that smelled of dust and old wood, servant corridors from when the house was built, and wealthy families wanted their help invisible. I crept through the darkness using my phone's dying light sparingly until I found another door that opened into what appeared to be an unused wing of the house. From there, it was easy to find a window that actually opened. I slipped out onto a balcony, then carefully made my way down a trellis that had probably supported roses for 100 years. My car was blocked in by several others, so I simply walked. 3 miles in designer flats on dark roads, but I didn't care. With each step away from the Whitmore estate, I felt more like myself. I reached a 24-hour diner just as the sky began to lighten. The waitress, a woman old enough to be my grandmother, took one look at my disheveled appearance and designer clothes and poured me coffee without asking. "Rough night, honey?" she asked kindly. "Something like that," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Can I borrow your phone?" Mine died. She handed over an ancient flip phone and I dialed the one number I'd memorized besides my father's. "Sterling Security." A crisp voice answered. "How may I assist you?" "This is Della Sterling," I said quietly. "I need an extraction from the Whitmore estate and tell my father the timeline has moved up." "Understood, Miss Sterling. A car will be at your location in 15 minutes. Your father has been notified." I handed the phone back to the waitress who was studying me with shrewd eyes. "You're the girl marrying the Whitmore boy today," she said. It wasn't a question. I was supposed to, I admitted. She refilled my coffee and patted my hand. "Good for you, honey. I've been serving coffee to people running from that family for 40 years. You're the first one who got out before the wedding. You know the Whitmores. Everyone around here knows them. Old money, older secrets. That Harold Whitmore stepped on a lot of people building his empire. Nice to see someone step back for a change." A black car pulled up outside and I recognized my father's security team. I left money on the counter and stood to go. "Hey," the waitress called. Whatever happens today, you hold your head high. Takes guts to walk away from all that money." "It wasn't about the money," I said. She smiled knowingly. "It never is for the ones who run. Good luck, honey." As I slid into the back of the car, I thought about all the women who'd sat in that diner over the years, fleeing the Whitmore family's suffocating control. How many had made it out? How many had been dragged back? "Ms. Sterling," the driver said, "your father is waiting at the apartment. He said to tell you the game is in play." I nodded, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, 300 guests would gather to watch Della Romano marry Ryan Whitmore. They'd come expecting society's event of the season. Instead, they'd witness something far more memorable the moment the Whitmore empire discovered that some prey have teeth. The prenup lay folded in my pocket, evidence of their arrogance and my near escape. They thought they'd trapped me with legal documents and locked doors. They had no idea that the real trap had been set 30 years ago, the moment Harold Whitmore stole from the wrong man. Today, William Sterling's daughter would spring that trap, and the Whitmores would finally learn that karma, like compound interest, only grows more powerful with time. The Whitmore estate buzzed with activity as vendors, florists, and staff scurried about like well-dressed ants. I stood at my designated prep station in the bridal suite, surrounded by Margaret's hand-picked team of stylists who seemed determined to transform me into someone unrecognizable. "Hold still." The makeup artist commanded her brush, loaded with enough foundation to spackle a wall. "Mrs. Whitmore wants a classic look, nothing too bold." Nothing too me, she meant. Every choice Margaret had made for this wedding was designed to erase Della Romano and create a generic Whitmore wife. The dress, the hair, the makeup, all of it screamed expensive but whispered forgettable. I'd returned to the estate that morning as if nothing had happened, playing the part of the chastened bride who'd seen reason. The security footage of my escape had mysteriously corrupted. One of the benefits of having a father who understood both technology and planning. Margaret had found me in the blue guest room at 7:30, dressed and ready, the signed prenup prominently displayed on the nightstand. She'd examined the signature closely this time, but I'd practiced it perfectly. Every letter was precise except for the tiny detail that would invalidate everything I'd signed it Della Romano instead of Romano. The difference was barely visible, just a small curve that turned an A into an O. But in legal documents, precision mattered. "Beautiful," she'd pronounced both about the signature and my compliance. "I knew you were a smart girl." Now 3 hours later, I sat like a mannequin while they painted and primped and prodded. Through the window, I could see the garden being transformed into what looked like a wedding magazine's fever dream. White everything. Chairs, flowers, draping, except for touches of gold that screamed wealth. "Isn't it gorgeous?" Stephanie bounced in, already dressed in her bridesmaid gown. Brittany outdid herself with the coordination. Brittany planned my wedding. I kept my voice neutral despite the spike of anger. "Oh, she's so good at events. She knows exactly what works for Whitmore occasions." Stephanie's smile was sharp as broken glass. Plus, she and Ryan have such history. She knew what he'd want. The door opened again and Madison slipped in, looking pale but perfectly put together in her own bridesmaid dress. She caught my eye in the mirror and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Whatever warning she'd tried to send last night, it was too late now. "Madison, there you are." Margaret swept in every inch, the mother of the groom in pale blue silk. "I need you to check with the caterers. That shrimp tower better be perfect." "Of course," Madison murmured. But as she passed my chair, she dropped something into my lap, a folded piece of paper that I quickly tucked under my robe. Margaret surveyed me critically. "The hair needs more height. This is a Whitmore wedding, not some backyard barbecue." The hairdresser immediately began teasing and spraying, building my hair into something that belonged in a museum exhibit on the 1960s. I let them work playing docile, while my mind raced through the timeline. It was now 11. The ceremony started at 4. My father's friends would begin arriving at 3:30. Now, Margaret settled into the chair beside me. Let's discuss your behavior today. You'll smile, but not too broadly. We don't want you looking maniacal in photos. You'll speak when spoken to, thank everyone for coming, and defer to Ryan for any important conversations. The photographer will want some candids, but I'll approve all shots before they're finalized. You're controlling the photos too, I couldn't help asking. Her reflection smiled coldly at mine. Everything about a Whitmore wedding is controlled, dear. That's how we maintain standards. Speaking of which, your vows. She produced a card with typed words. You'll read these. They're appropriate and tasteful. I scanned the card. Generic promises to honor and obey, to support Ryan's career, to uphold the Whitmore name. Not a single word about love partnership or the life we'd supposedly build together. Where are Ryan's vows? I asked. He'll speak from the heart, Margaret said dismissively. Men are expected to be more emotional at weddings. It plays well. Everything was performance. Everything was calculated. I wondered if any Whitmore wedding had ever been about actual love, or if they'd all been mergers disguised in white lace. Mrs. Whitmore. A young assistant appeared at the door looking flustered. There's a question about the seating chart. Someone named William Sterling has RSVP'd, but he's not on the original list. My heart skipped, but I kept my face neutral as Margaret frowned. Sterling? I don't know any Sterling. Must be someone's +1. Put him in the back. He specifically requested family seating, the assistant persisted. He said he's the bride's father. The room went silent. Margaret's eyes snapped to mine in the mirror. Your father's name is Sterling. You said it was Romano. Romano is my mother's maiden name, I said calmly. I use it professionally. My legal name is Sterling Romano, but I go by Romano for simplicity. It wasn't technically a lie. I did use my mother's name professionally, wanting to make my own way without my father's influence. But the calculation in Margaret's eyes told me she was already trying to connect dots. Sterling, she repeated. In tech, you said, yes. She waved at the assistant. Fine family seating, but third row. The first two are for immediate family only. The assistant scurried away and Margaret turned her laser focus back to me. Interesting that you never mentioned your surname situation. What else haven't you mentioned? Nothing relevant to marrying Ryan, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Everything is relevant when you're marrying a Whitmore, she countered. But no matter, after today you'll be Della Whitmore and all this confusion about names will be moot. She left to terrorize the florists and I quickly unfolded Madison's note. Her handwriting was shaky but legible. They're planning to have Brittany object during the ceremony. She'll claim you've been having an affair. They have fabricated evidence. Harold thinks it will give them grounds to enforce the penalty clause. Run now while you can. I crumpled the note, my mind racing. So that was their game. Let me marry Ryan, then immediately destroy me with false accusations. They'd get their perfect wedding photos and their financial revenge in one neat package. The makeup artist returned to powder my nose and I smiled at her serenely. Let them play their games. They had no idea what was coming. Phone for you, miss. Another assistant appeared with my cell. Someone named James. I didn't know any James, but I took the phone. My father's voice was disguised but recognizable to me. Pearls at 347 Princess. Everything is in place. Thank you, James, I said pleasantly. Yes, I'll be ready on time. As the hours crawled by, the suite filled with bridesmaids and energy. Stephanie held court telling stories about Ryan's old girlfriends. Madison moved like a ghost, silent and efficient. Brittany was notably absent, probably preparing for her starring role in the afternoon's drama. Time to get dressed. Margaret announced at 2:30, and suddenly hands were everywhere, sliding me into the massive dress, adjusting the train, pinning the veil. I felt like a doll being prepared for display. The pearls, I said when they reached for the diamond necklace Margaret had selected. I want to wear my mother's pearls. Absolutely not, Margaret started, but I cut her off. They're my something old, unless Whitmore weddings don't follow that tradition. She couldn't argue with tradition, not with the photographer capturing getting ready shots. The pearls were clasped around my neck, their familiar weight comforting against my skin. "You look beautiful," Madison whispered as she adjusted my train. "I'm sorry for everything." "It's not your fault," I murmured back. "No, but I didn't warn you. I thought maybe it would be different, maybe Ryan actually loved you. But they're all the same, all of them. The money ruins them." Before I could respond, she was whisked away to join the other bridesmaids. I stood before the full-length mirror, taking in the stranger, looking back. The dress was undeniably gorgeous, the hair and makeup flawless. But it wasn't me. It was Margaret's vision of a proper Whitmore wife, expensive, elegant, empty. 5 minutes. Someone called and my heart began to race. Not from nerves about marriage, but from anticipation. In 5 minutes, I'd begin the walk that would end very differently than anyone expected. Ryan appeared at the door, breaking tradition. "You look perfect," he said, his eyes skimming over me like I was a business presentation he approved of. "Isn't it bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony?" I asked. "We make our own luck," he replied, which would have sounded romantic if his tone wasn't so flat. "Mother wanted me to check that you were ready. No second thoughts." "None at all," I said truthfully. I had no thoughts about marrying him because it wasn't going to happen. "Good. I'll see you at the altar." He paused at the door. "Della, after this is over, after we're married, I hope we can put all the unpleasantness behind us. Start fresh." "I don't think that's possible, Ryan." His jaw tightened. "It better be. We have a lifetime ahead of us." He left and I touched my pearls, feeling their smooth surface. 3:47. Less than an hour until the truth would detonate in the middle of their perfect garden party. The wedding coordinator appeared, clipboard in hand and stress in her eyes. "Time to go, Ms. Romano. Your father is waiting to walk you down." I almost laughed. She had no idea which father would be walking me down that aisle or what would happen when we reached the end. As I gathered my train and prepared to leave the suite, I caught sight of myself one more time in the mirror. The Whitmore bride stared back everything Margaret had demanded, but beneath the designer dress and careful makeup, Della Sterling smiled. They thought they'd bought me, controlled me, trapped me. They thought their money and manipulations made them invincible. They thought wrong. The wedding march was about to begin, but it wouldn't be celebrating a union. It would be marking the end of the Whitmore Empire's unchecked cruelty. And they'd have 300 witnesses to watch it fall. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's canon as the garden doors opened before me. 300 faces turned in unison, a sea of designer hats and expectant smiles. The aisle stretched ahead like a white ribbon, lined with roses that probably cost more than a year of college tuition. But I barely noticed any of it, because standing at the entrance offering his arm with a slight smile was William Sterling. My father had dressed for war disguised as a wedding. His tuxedo was impeccable but understated the kind of quiet elegance that didn't need to announce its worth. To everyone else, he probably looked like any other wedding guest, but I saw the steel in his spine, the purpose in his eyes. "You look beautiful, princess," he murmured as I took his arm. "Just like your mother on our wedding day." "Daddy," I whispered back, "are you sure about this?" "I've been sure for 30 years, he replied. "Now smile, we have an audience." We began our walk and I could feel the confusion rippling through the crowd. Who was this distinguished man with the bride? Where was the absent father they'd heard so much about? In the front row, Margaret's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then something approaching fear. She leaned over to Harold, whose complexion was rapidly matching the white roses. But it was Ryan's face that told the whole story. He stood at the altar trying to project confidence, but his eyes darted between me and my father with growing alarm. Behind him, his groomsmen shifted nervously. Marcus actually took a half step back. The walk took forever and no time at all. Each step brought us closer to the altar where Reverend Morrison waited with his practiced smile and leather-bound book. The garden was silent except for the music and the subtle clicking of photographers' cameras. I spotted familiar faces in the crowd: board members from various charities where I'd worked, society matrons who attended every fundraiser, business associates of Harold's who looked increasingly uncomfortable as they recognized my father. And there, in the third row where Margaret had relegated him, sat Jonathan Blackwood, federal prosecutor, and my father's law school roommate. The music faded as we reached the altar. This was the moment where my father should hand me over to Ryan, symbolic of transferring ownership from one man to another. Instead, William Sterling stood firmly in place, his hand still covering mine on his arm. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Morrison began, but my father raised his free hand. "Actually, Reverend, before we proceed, I believe there are some matters that need addressing." The garden erupted in whispers. Margaret shot to her feet. "This is highly irregular. The ceremony—" "Will wait!" my father said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. He looked at Harold, and 30 years of patient fury lived in that gaze. "Hello, Harold. It's been a long time." Harold's face had gone from white to red to an alarming purple. "William Sterling," he managed to choke out. "Ah, so you do remember me. I wondered after you built your empire on my work if you'd forgotten the man you stole it from." The whispers turned to gasps. Phones appeared in hands as guests realized they were witnessing something far more dramatic than a society wedding. "This is outrageous," Harold blustered. "You can't just—" "Can I?" My father's smile was sharp as winter. "You see, Harold, you taught me a valuable lesson all those years ago. You showed me the importance of documentation of contracts, of having everything in writing. So I did." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. 30 years ago, you stole my supply chain innovation system. You filed patents on my algorithms, built your fortune on my code. But you made one mistake. You were so eager to cut me out, you forgot to check if I'd filed provisional patents first. Jonathan Blackwood stood up in the third row. "Patents that were sealed under trade secret protection until yesterday," he added helpfully, along with some very interesting documentation about the origins of the Whitmore fortune. "You're lying," Marcus sputtered, his lawyer brain finally catching up. "The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing fraud," another voice called out. I turned to see Patricia Chen, head of the SEC's Enforcement Division, rising from her seat. "Which is what we're very interested in discussing with your family, Mr. Whitmore." The garden had become a three-ring circus. Guests were filming openly now, society reporters typing furiously on their phones. The wedding photographer, bless him, just kept shooting, probably realizing he was capturing the story of the year. "Daddy," yeah, I said loudly enough to cut through the chaos. "I think you should tell them about the prenup." "Ah, yes, the prenup." William's voice carried perfectly without shouting. "The one you pressured my daughter to sign under duress last night. The one that strips her of all rights, treats her like property, includes illegal clauses about child custody. The one signed with an invalid signature, because even under that kind of pressure, my daughter was smart enough to protect herself." I pulled the pearls, our signal, though it was hardly necessary now. The morning's carefully constructed timeline was in ruins, and the Whitmores were drowning in their own arrogance. "You set us up," Ryan said, his voice hollow. He wasn't looking at my father, he was looking at me. "This whole thing was a setup." "No," I said clearly. "I loved you. I would have married you happily if you'd stood up for me even once, if you'd chosen us over them, if you'd been the man you pretended to be when we met." "But you didn't," my father continued. "Instead, you participated in attempting to trap my daughter in a fraudulent contract. You imprisoned her in your home. You threatened her livelihood if she didn't comply. Did you really think I'd let that stand?" "This is a private family matter," Margaret shrieked, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "Not anymore," said Roger Feinstein from the New York Times, his press badge visible as he stood. "Miss Sterling, would you care to comment on your experience with the Whitmore family?" That's when Brittany decided to play her card. She stood up from her seat among the groomsmen's dates, perfectly timed for maximum drama. "I object," she called out, even though we hadn't reached that part of the ceremony. "This woman has been having an affair. I have proof." She waved her phone triumphantly, but whatever fabricated evidence she'd prepared became irrelevant when Madison Whitmore suddenly laughed. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her, and it transformed her face. "Oh, Brittany," Madison said, her voice carrying surprising strength. "Do you really want to talk about affairs? Should we discuss why you have a key to my husband's apartment, or why you were leaving the Whitmore building at 3 a.m. last Tuesday?" The groomsmen's section erupted as Marcus tried to silence his wife, but Madison had found her voice and wasn't giving it up. "I've been documenting everything," she announced to the stunned crowd. "Every affair, every hidden asset, every bribe to keep business partners quiet. 5 years of evidence all backed up and sent to my lawyer this morning." "You signed an NDA," Marcus roared. "Which became void the moment you committed fraud," Madison shot back. "My lawyer says hi, by the way. She's sitting right there." She pointed to a severe-looking woman in the 5th row who waved cheerfully at the chaos. That's when Harold made his fatal error. In his fury and desperation, he lunged at my father. "You've ruined everything." But William Sterling hadn't built an empire by being unprepared. He sidestepped easily, and Harold's momentum carried him straight into the wedding cake table. The 5-tier monstrosity toppled in a cascade of fondant and sugar flowers, covering the patriarch in what was probably $20,000 worth of pastry. "I think," my father said calmly as Harold sputtered and raged from the ground, "this concludes the ceremony, Della." I looked at Ryan one last time. He stood at the altar like a broken mannequin, his perfect world crumbling around him. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. "I'm sorry it had to end this way," I told him. "I really did love who I thought you were." "Della, wait," he called as I turned away. "We can fix this. We can start over." "No," I said simply. "We can't. You showed me who you really are, Ryan. Someone who'll sacrifice love for money, who'll stand by while his family attacks someone he claims to care about. That's not fixable." I walked back down that aisle on my father's arm, but this time I held my head high. Behind us, the garden erupted into complete chaos. Federal investigators were serving papers. Madison was detailing Marcus's crimes to anyone with a recording device. Margaret was trying to salvage some dignity while covered in cake frosting alongside her husband. And through it all, the photographer kept shooting, documenting the complete destruction of the Whitmore Empire's carefully maintained facade. As we reached the garden doors, I heard Stephanie wail, "This wasn't supposed to happen. Brittany promised everything would work out." My father chuckled. "Did you know Brittany also moonlighted as an informant for the FBI? Apparently the Whitmores weren't as careful with their financial improprieties as they thought." "How long have you been planning this?" I asked as we walked through the estate toward the valet station. "Since the moment you told me they'd hurt you," he said simply. "But Harold, I've been waiting 30 years to watch him fall. That it happened while defending my daughter. That's just poetic justice." The valet brought my father's car around, not the Bentley or the Aston Martin, but a simple Tesla. "Keep it understated," he'd always taught me. "Let your actions announce your worth, not your possessions." "Ms. Romano, Ms. Sterling, wait." A crowd of reporters surged toward us, but my father's security team materialized from the crowd, creating a path. "One question," Roger from the Times called out. "What's next for you?" I paused at the car door, looking back at the estate where my wedding had become a crime scene. Then I smiled, my first genuine smile in months. I'm going back to my real life, my work, my apartment, my name. I touched my mother's pearls one more time. The Whitmores taught me something valuable, though. They showed me that wealth without integrity is just theft with better lawyers. I'd rather be honestly middle class than live in a palace built on other people's dreams. As we drove away, I could see the flashing lights of federal vehicles arriving. The Whitmore Empire, built on stolen innovation and maintained through decades of bullying and coercion, was finally facing justice. "So," my father said as we reached the highway, "where would you like to go? Paris, Tokyo? I think you've earned a vacation." "Actually," I said, watching the estate disappear in the rearview mirror, "I'd like to go home, my real home. Tomorrow there's a literacy program that needs volunteers, and I promised to read to the kids." He smiled the proud smile that reminded me why I'd kept my identity secret in the first place. I wanted to earn that pride, not inherit it. "That's my girl," he said. "Your mother would be so proud." But I didn't care about any of that. I was free. Free from the prenup, free from the Whitmore family, free from a future that would have slowly suffocated everything real about me. And somewhere in that ruined garden, 300 guests were learning that sometimes the best weddings are the ones that don't happen at all. The garden looked like a disaster zone. Overturned chairs, scattered flowers, and the destroyed wedding cake created a scene worthy of a battlefield. But the real destruction was happening to the Whitmore family's reputation as federal investigators worked through the crowd, taking statements and serving subpoenas. I stood with my father near the estate's entrance, still in my wedding dress, but feeling lighter than I had in months. The pearls around my neck caught the afternoon sun, reminding me of my mother's strength. "Ms. Sterling." Jonathan Blackwood approached with a satisfied expression. "We'll need your statement about the prenuptial agreement and false imprisonment, but that can wait until Monday." "Of course," I nodded. "Whatever helps." Margaret Whitmore's shrill voice cut through the chaos. "This is entrapment harassment. Our lawyers will destroy all of you." She stood in the ruins of her perfect wedding designer dress stained with cake, pointing accusingly at anyone within range. But her threats fell flat as more investigators arrived, some wearing FBI windbreakers, others bearing SEC credentials. "Mrs. Whitmore," Patricia Chen said calmly, "I'd stop talking if I were you. Anything you say can and will be used against you." That's when Ryan finally found his voice. He pushed through the crowd, his tuxedo disheveled, his carefully styled hair in disarray. "Della, please," he called out. "Let me explain." I turned to face him, my father tensing beside me, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's okay, Daddy. I need to hear this." Ryan stopped a few feet away, his green eyes desperate. "I didn't know. About the investigators, about your father, about any of it." "But you knew about the prenup," I said quietly. "You knew about locking me in that room. You knew your family was threatening to destroy my career if I didn't comply." His shoulders slumped. I thought it was normal. It's how things have always worked in my family, how my parents' marriage worked, how Marcus's marriage worked. And you never once thought that maybe that was wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar. "When I met you, I was different. But the closer we got to the wedding, the more my family got involved, the more I felt like I had to choose between their world and yours." "So you chose theirs." "I chose the easy path," he admitted. "I chose not fighting them because I didn't think I could win." Behind him, Harold was being escorted to a federal vehicle, loudly protesting about his rights and connections. Margaret followed her dignity in tatters as she tried to explain why their financial records would show complete innocence. "Did you ever actually love me?" I asked Ryan. "Or was I just someone who fit the image you wanted to project?" For the first time since this chaos began, Ryan looked me directly in the eyes. "I loved you. God help me, I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone. But I'm a coward, Della. I couldn't stand up to them, couldn't risk losing everything I'd been raised to value. You lost me instead," I said softly, "and what are you left with now?" We both looked at the estate grounds. Federal agents were cataloging evidence. Guests were giving statements or fleeing as quickly as dignity allowed. The Whitmore empire was crumbling in real time. "Nothing," Ryan said hollowly. "I'm left with nothing that matters." Brittany chose that moment to try slipping away unnoticed, but Madison's lawyer intercepted her. "Ms. Daniels, I have some questions about your role in drafting illegal contracts, and I believe the FBI wants to discuss your interesting side arrangement with the Whitmore finances." "This is your fault," Brittany spun on Ryan. "You were supposed to handle her. Keep her quiet and compliant like we discussed." "Like you discussed?" I asked, though I wasn't really surprised. Ryan's face flushed. "It wasn't like that. Brittany was just giving advice." Advice like hiring actors to fabricate evidence of an affair. My father spoke for the first time, his voice deadly quiet. "Yes, we know about that too. Amazing what people will confess when they think they're texting a co-conspirator instead of an FBI informant." Brittany's face went white as she realized the depth of her exposure. "I want a lawyer." "Probably wise," Jonathan Blackwood agreed. "You'll need a good one." As Brittany was led away, I noticed movement in the crowd. Madison Whitmore was walking toward us, her chin high despite everything. She'd removed her bridesmaid dress somewhere along the way and wore a simple black outfit that made her look younger, freer. "Della," she said when she reached us, "I wanted to apologize and to thank you." Thank me? For having the courage to stand up to them. Her voice was steady, but tears tracked down her cheeks. For showing me it was possible to fight back. I've been documenting their crimes for years, but never had the strength to do anything about it until today. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Divorce Marcus. Testify to everything I know. Then maybe I'll figure out who I was before they turned me into a Whitmore wife." She smiled wobbly but real. "I used to paint, you know. Haven't touched a brush in 5 years." "Paint," I encouraged her. "Paint everything you couldn't say out loud." She hugged me quickly, then walked away with her lawyer ready to face whatever came next. "Della." I turned to find Stephanie approaching cautiously. Unlike the others, she looked more bewildered than angry. "Is it true?" she asked. "What that prosecutor said about Dad, that he stole everything?" I glanced at my father, who nodded slightly. "Yes," I told her. "It's true." She absorbed this, her world reshaping itself in real time. I always wondered why he was so paranoid about contracts, why he insisted on controlling everything. It was because he was afraid someone would do to him what he did to your father. "Probably," I agreed. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "About everything. The comments, the sneering, the way we treated you. I thought we were protecting something valuable. But we were just protecting a lie, weren't we?" Before I could respond, she walked back toward the house, probably to face her own reckoning with the family legacy. "Ms. Sterling." A young woman with a press badge approached. "Sarah Walsh from the Wall Street Journal. Could we get a statement about your father's patents and their connection to the Whitmore empire?" My father stepped forward. "I'll be holding a press conference on Monday. For now, I'll say this: 30 years ago, Harold Whitmore stole my innovations and built his fortune on them. I spent those decades building my own empire, legitimately waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. That moment came when he tried to do to my daughter what he did to me." "And the wedding?" Sarah pressed. "Was it all a setup?" "No," I said firmly. "I genuinely loved Ryan Whitmore. I would have married him happily if he'd been the man he pretended to be. But when his family showed their true nature, when they tried to trap me in an unconscionable prenup, when Ryan chose their money over our love, well, that's when my father and I decided it was time for truth." "One more question," Sarah said quickly. "What happens to the Whitmore empire now?" William Sterling smiled, the expression sharp with satisfaction. "I imagine the federal investigations will reveal quite a bit about their business practices. The patent dispute will be settled in court, and the market—" He shrugged elegantly. "The market doesn't like uncertainty. I suspect Whitmore Industries will be quite a different company by year's end, if it exists at all." As Sarah rushed off to file her story, I saw the wedding photographer approaching with his camera. "I'm sorry," I started. "I know this isn't what you were hired to capture." "Are you kidding?" he interrupted, grinning. "This is the most incredible event I've ever shot. The composition, the drama, the emotions, it's pure art. Would you mind if I entered some of these in journalism competitions?" Despite everything, I laughed. "Sure, Just make sure you get Harold covered in cake from multiple angles." "Already did," he assured me. "That's going to be magazine cover material." The sun was starting to set, painting the destroyed garden in shades of gold and crimson. Guests had mostly fled or been escorted away. The Whitmore family was nowhere to be seen, probably huddled with their lawyers, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "Ready to go home?" my father asked gently. I looked at Ryan one last time. He stood alone among the overturned chairs, watching me with an expression of profound loss. Part of me wanted to comfort him, but I knew that would be cruel. He'd made his choices. Now he had to live with them. "Actually," I said, "there's one more thing I need to do." I walked back through the garden to where the gift table somehow remained intact. Hundreds of wrapped presents from society's elite, all expecting to celebrate a union that would never happen. "These should go to the women's shelter on Riverside," I announced to the remaining staff. "Every single gift. They need housewares and nice things more than I ever will." "You can't," one of Margaret's assistants protested. "These gifts are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Exactly," I smiled, "which will help hundreds of women starting over. Please see that it's done." As I walked back to my father, I heard the assistant muttering about tax receipts and grateful donors who'd appreciate the charity redirect. Even in destruction, some good could come. "Now I'm ready," I told my father. But as we reached his car, one more surprise waited. William's phone buzzed with a text and his eyebrows rose. "What is it?" I asked. "Harold's hidden offshore accounts," he said, showing me the screen. Apparently, Brittany wasn't the only informant. Harold's personal banker has been cooperating with authorities for months. The Whitmores are about to discover they're not just facing civil lawsuits and patent disputes. They're facing criminal charges. Tax evasion, money laundering, fraud. The list is extensive. He pocketed his phone. It seems Harold learned the wrong lesson 30 years ago. He learned to take what wasn't his. He never learned that eventually the bill comes due. As we drove away from the estate, I rolled down the window, letting the evening air wash over me. My wedding dress rustled in the breeze, but I didn't care about preserving it. It had served its purpose, just not the one Margaret intended. "Daddy," I said as the city lights came into view. "Thank you." "For what, Princess?" "For waiting until I needed you. For letting me find out for myself who Ryan really was. For being there when it mattered." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your mother always said you'd know when someone truly loved you, because they'd stand up for you when it cost them something. Ryan failed that test." Spectacularly, I agreed. "But you passed it," he continued. "You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to sign those papers and live in that golden cage. I'm proud of you, Della." Through the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of smoke rising from the direction of the estate. Not actual fire, I realized, but the metaphorical burning of the Whitmore empire. By tomorrow, their name would be synonymous with scandal. Their fortune would be frozen pending investigations. Their legacy would be one of theft and lies finally exposed. And somewhere in that wreckage, Ryan Whitmore would have to figure out who he was without his family's money and power. Maybe he'd become the man he'd pretended to be when we met. Or maybe he'd remain the coward who chose easy wealth over difficult love. Either way, it wasn't my story anymore. My story was just beginning, and it started with returning to my small apartment, my real life, and the work that actually mattered. Tomorrow, I'd read to children at the literacy center. I'd plan fundraisers for causes I believed in. I'd build something real with my own hands and heart. The Whitmores had tried to buy me, cage me, control me. Instead, they'd freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. William Sterling's daughter, yes, but more importantly, Della Romano, who stood up to bullies and won. The wedding that didn't happen would be remembered far longer than any successful ceremony. And the woman who walked away in a designer dress and her mother's pearls, she'd remember it as the day she chose herself. By the time we returned to the city, the Whitmore wedding disaster was already trending globally. Social media had exploded with videos of Harold covered in cake federal agents, serving papers, and my father's dramatic revelation. But the real circus was just beginning at the Whitmore Industries headquarters. "Turn on Channel 7, my father said as we entered his penthouse. He'd insisted I stay there for the night, worried about potential retaliation. The screen filled with aerial footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of the Whitmore building. The reporter's voice was breathless with excitement. In an unprecedented fall from grace, the Whitmore family empire faces federal investigation on multiple fronts. Sources indicate this stems from a wedding ceremony that turned into a crime scene earlier today." I sank into the plush sofa, still wearing my wedding dress. It felt surreal watching my personal drama play out on national television. William Sterling tech billionaire and father of the bride has released documentation showing that Harold Whitmore built his retail empire on stolen technology. The reporter continued. Meanwhile, Madison Whitmore, estranged wife of Marcus Whitmore, has provided investigators with what she claims is evidence of decades of financial crimes. The scene cut to Madison standing outside a law office looking composed despite the media frenzy. "For 5 years, I watched my husband and his family operate above the law," she said clearly. "They destroyed anyone who opposed them, bought silence with threats and money. Today that ends." "She's brave," I murmured. "She's protected," my father corrected. "I made sure she had security and legal representation before today. The Whitmores have a history of silencing witnesses." My phone buzzed with hundreds of messages. Friends, colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay, if the stories were true, if I'd really left Ryan Whitmore at the altar. One message stood out from my boss at the Literacy Foundation. "Take all the time you need, but when you're ready, we have 3 new programs to plan and a donor who specifically wants to work with you. P.S. Best wedding video ever." Despite everything, I smiled. My real life was waiting for me unchanged by the Whitmore drama. "Della," my father said, his tone shifting to business. "There's something else you need to know. The investigators found more than financial crimes." He handed me a tablet showing court documents. As I read, my blood chilled. The Whitmores hadn't just been controlling their family members, they'd been systematically destroying competitors, blackmailing board members, and maintaining their empire through what amounted to corporate terrorism. "Ryan knew?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The penthouse felt like a sanctuary, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. By morning, the media frenzy had reached fever pitch. Every news outlet wanted my story, my father's story, the inside scoop on the wedding that exposed a criminal empire. "You need to speak," my father said over breakfast. "Control the narrative before they create one for you." He was right. I'd spent the night watching various experts speculate about my motives, with some even suggesting I'd been part of a long con to entrap the Whitmores. The truth needed to come from me. "I'll do it," I decided, but on my terms. 2 hours later, I sat in my father's home office facing a single camera for a live-streamed press conference. I'd changed out of the wedding dress into a simple blue sheath. My own clothes, my own choice. My mother's pearls still rested against my throat. "Good morning." I began looking directly into the lens. "I'm Della Sterling, though many of you know me as Della Romano. I want to address what happened yesterday and correct some misconceptions." The viewer count was climbing rapidly. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Somewhere out there, I knew the Whitmores were watching too. 2 years ago, I met Ryan Whitmore at a charity event. I was organizing it. He was volunteering. I fell in love with a man who seemed kind, genuine, and committed to making a difference. I kept my family background private because I wanted to be loved for who I am not, for my father's success. I took a breath, steadying myself for the harder truths. 24 hours before our wedding, the Whitmore family presented me with a prenuptial agreement that would have stripped me of all rights, controlled my every action, and even dictated custody of future children. When I hesitated, they locked me in a room. When I asked questions, they threatened to destroy my career and reputation. The The comments were streaming by too fast to read, but I caught words like brave and shocking, mixed with inevitable skepticism. I signed that agreement with an invalid signature because I was under duress and refused to be trapped. I attended the wedding because I hoped until the last moment that Ryan would choose our love over his family's demands. He didn't. I looked directly at the camera, imagining Ryan watching. Ryan, I know you're seeing this. I want you to hear this from me. I loved you. The real you, the one who read stories to children and brought me coffee during long nights. But when your family showed their true nature, you chose their wealth over our future. That's a choice you'll have to live with. Now for the harder part. My father, William Sterling, built his empire on innovation and hard work. 30 years ago, Harold Whitmore stole his technology and used it to build the Whitmore fortune. My father waited 3 decades for justice, and yesterday he got it. Not through revenge, but through truth. I held up a folder of documents. These are copies of the original patents, the proof of theft, the evidence that the Whitmore empire was built on stolen dreams. But more than that, these represent a pattern. The Whitmores didn't just steal once. They made a practice of destroying anyone who stood in their way. The viewer count had passed 1 million. Comments flooded in from around the world. To those asking if this was all planned, no. I genuinely intended to marry Ryan. My father came to that wedding as a last resort to protect me from a family that had already proven they would destroy anyone who defied them. I set down the documents and spoke from the heart. To the women trapped in similar situations in relationships where love comes with contracts and control, you deserve better. Love shouldn't require you to sign away your rights. Family shouldn't come with terms and conditions. If someone truly loves you, they'll stand up for you when it matters. A notification popped up on the screen. The Whitmore family lawyer was demanding I cease and desist. I smiled slightly. I see the Whitmore legal team is watching. Good. Let me be clear, I will cooperate fully with all investigations. I will testify to everything I witnessed, and I will not be silenced by threats or lawsuits. I leaned forward, my voice gaining strength. The Whitmores thought they could buy me, control me, and discard me when I didn't comply. They thought their money made them untouchable. They were wrong. Money without morality is just theft with accounting. Power without principles is just bullying with lawyers. The comments were now overwhelmingly supportive. Stories poured in from others who'd been victimized by the Whitmores or similar families. A movement was building in real time. I want to address Ryan directly one more time. Ryan, you have a choice. You can continue defending the indefensible, or you can finally become the man you pretended to be when we met. Your family's empire is crumbling, but you don't have to fall with it. Stand up. Tell the truth. It's not too late to choose integrity over inheritance. I paused, then continued. To Harold and Margaret Whitmore, you tried to do to me what you did to my father 30 years ago. But times have changed. The world is watching now. Your threats don't work when there are 1 million witnesses. My phone lit up with a text from Madison. Thank you for giving me courage. Watching now with my lawyer. We're filing additional charges based on what I documented. The abuse, the control, the financial manipulation, all of it. I smiled at the camera. I've just received word that more victims are coming forward. To anyone else who's been hurt by the Whitmores, you're not alone. Speak up. The empire they built on fear is crumbling, and your voices matter. The livestream comment count showed over 2 million viewers now. News outlets were already cutting clips, sharing sound bites, turning my personal stand into a public rallying cry. Finally, I want to thank everyone who's reached out with support. I'm returning to my work at the Literacy Foundation, where I'll continue doing what I love, helping children access books and education. The Whitmores tried to make me feel small for choosing charity over profit. But I've seen what profit without purpose creates. I'll take meaning over money every time. I reached for the pearls one more time, drawing strength from their familiar weight. My mother used to say that integrity is what you do when no one's watching. Well, everyone's watching now. And I want you to see me choose truth over comfort, honesty over wealth, and freedom over a golden cage. I stood preparing to end the broadcast. The wedding that didn't happen yesterday wasn't a tragedy. It was a liberation. For me, for Madison, for everyone who's been silenced by wealth and power. The Whitmore's empire may fall, but from its ashes, maybe we can build something better. Something real. Something that doesn't require people to sign away their souls for acceptance. The final words came from my heart. To anyone watching who's trapped in their own version of a Whitmore prenup, whether it's a relationship, a job, or a family that demands you become someone you're not, know this: you deserve better. You are worth more than what they're offering. And sometimes, the best deal is the one you walk away from. I reached for the camera button, then paused. Oh, and to the wedding photographer who captured everything yesterday, please do enter those photos in competitions. Let the world see what it looks like when someone chooses freedom over fear. Thank you. I ended the stream. The view counter froze at 2.3 million. Within minutes, my father's publicist was fielding hundreds of interview requests. But I wasn't interested in becoming a media sensation. What now? My father asked, pride evident in his eyes. Now I go home, I said simply. To my apartment, my job, my life. The Whitmores will face justice through the courts. I've said what needed saying. But even as I spoke, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized: Ryan. I almost didn't answer. Then, remembering my words about choosing courage, I picked up. Della. His voice was broken raw. I watched your stream, every word. And you're right, about everything. About me being a coward, about choosing money over love, about my family. A pause. I'm at the federal building. I'm about to go in and tell them everything I know. My heart skipped, but I kept my voice steady. Why are you telling me? Because you said it wasn't too late to choose integrity over inheritance. Because maybe if I do the right thing now, someday I can look in the mirror without hating what I see. Ryan, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you did what I couldn't. You stood up to them. And now, because of you, maybe I can too. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, processing this unexpected development. He's turning witness, my father asked, reading my expression. Apparently. That took courage, he acknowledged grudgingly. Late, but still courage. Through the penthouse windows, I could see the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, the Whitmores were scrambling to salvage their empire. Madison was building a new life. Ryan was walking into a federal building to betray his family, and countless others were finding strength in shared stories of survival. My phone buzzed with a news alert: breaking, Ryan Whitmore enters federal building, reportedly cooperating with investigation. Then another: Madison Whitmore files for emergency divorce, citing years of abuse and financial fraud. And another: Whitmore Industries stock plummets as board calls emergency meeting. The empire was falling faster than anyone could have imagined, but I felt no satisfaction in their destruction, only relief that their reign of terror was ending. I need to go, I told my father. The Literacy Center has a reading session this afternoon. I promised the kids I'd be there. He hugged me tightly. Your mother would be so proud. You stood up for yourself with grace and truth. I learned from the best, I said, meaning both my parents. As I prepared to leave, one final text arrived, from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Sterling, this is Stephanie Whitmore. I'm at the FBI office with Ryan. We're both cooperating fully. I wanted to say thank you for your words today. You showed us there's another way to live. I'm choosing it. Maybe too late, but I'm choosing it. I smiled sadly. The Whitmore children were finally breaking free, but at such a cost. Their parents had built them a prison of gold and called it love. My father's driver took me back to my small apartment. Reporters clustered outside, but building security kept them at bay. Inside my studio, everything was exactly as I'd left it. My secondhand furniture, my wall of thank you letters from the literacy program, my simple life that the Whitmores had found so beneath them. I changed into jeans and a t-shirt, packed my bag with picture books, and headed to the community center. The children didn't care about viral videos or fallen empires. They just wanted someone to read them stories, to make funny voices, to show them worlds beyond their own. As I sat in the reading circle surrounded by eager faces, I thought about the different kinds of wealth. The Whitmores had millions but lived in fear of losing control. These children had very little but radiated joy at the simplest pleasures. Ms. Della. One little girl asked, "Are you a princess? You were on TV in a pretty dress." I smiled, thinking of how my father sometimes called me princess, how the Whitmores had tried to buy me a crown that came with chains. "No, sweetheart," I said, opening the first book. "I'm just someone who loves stories. Want to hear one about a brave little girl who stood up to a dragon." Their enthusiastic yes filled the room. As I began reading, making my voice growl for the dragon and squeak for the mouse who helped the heroine, I felt more myself than I had in months. Outside, the Whitmore empire continued to crumble. Inside this small room, surrounded by children who saw magic in simple words on a page, I remembered what really mattered. The wedding that wasn't had made headlines around the world. But this, reading to kids who needed to believe in happy endings, this was my real life. And I wouldn't trade it for all the Whitmore millions in the world. My phone sat silent in my bag, no doubt filled with messages and media requests. They could wait. Right now, a dragon needed defeating and a brave girl needed to save the day. Just like in real life, sometimes the best victories came not from what you gained, but from what you had the courage to refuse. 3 days after the wedding disaster, the full scope of William Sterling's plan became clear. I sat in my father's office watching him coordinate with lawyers, investigators, and financial advisors like a conductor directing a symphony of justice. The patent documentation is irrefutable. Jonathan Blackwood explained spreading papers across the conference table. Harold built everything on your stolen algorithms, every innovation, every efficiency that made Whitmore Industries profitable. It all traces back to your original work. Which means, I asked, though I suspected the answer. Which means, my father said with quiet satisfaction, that I own the foundational technology their entire empire runs on. 30 years of royalties, damages, and interest. The numbers were staggering. What Harold had stolen was worth millions then. Compounded over 3 decades with the expansion of the business built on it, the liability ran into billions. But that's not even the best part. Patricia Chen from the SEC added, pulling up financial records on her tablet. Madison Whitmore's documentation shows systematic fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering going back decades. The criminal penalties alone will bankrupt them. My phone buzzed. Ryan again. I'd been avoiding his calls since his decision to cooperate with authorities, but this time the message was different. "Please answer. They're threatening Mom and Stephanie. Dad's lost it completely." Against my better judgment, I stepped out to take the call. "Della." Ryan's voice was strained. Thank God, I didn't know who else to call. "What's happening?" "Dad's barricaded himself in the house with Mom. He's destroying everything. Computers, documents, artwork. He keeps ranting about not letting them win. Stephanie's here with me at the FBI office. We're terrified he'll hurt Mom or himself." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Mental breakdown or not, this was still a family in crisis. "Have you called the police?" "They're there, but Dad won't let them in. He keeps screaming about his rights, his legacy." A pause. "Della, I know I have no right to ask, but could he help Dad might listen to him?" I returned to the conference room and explained the situation. My father's expression was unreadable as he processed this information. "Harold's breaking down," he said finally. "After 30 years of living in fear that someone would do to him what he did to others, it's finally happening." "Will you help?" I asked. He stood straightening his tie. "Not for Harold, but Margaret doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in her husband's collapse, and their children are trying to do the right thing." An hour later, we stood outside the Whitmore estate with police negotiators. The house looked different in daylight without wedding decorations. Less magical kingdom, more fortress. Through the windows, we could see Harold moving frantically, Margaret nowhere in sight. "Mr. Whitmore," the negotiator called through a megaphone. "This is Detective Martinez. We're concerned for your safety and your wife's. Please come to the door so we can talk." "Go away." Harold's voice was hoarse, desperate. "This is private property. You have no right." My father stepped forward. "Let me try." The negotiator hesitated, then handed him the megaphone. "Harold," my father's voice carried clearly. "It's William Sterling. We need to talk." Silence. Then movement at a window. "Come to gloat, Sterling." Harold's voice cracked. "Come to watch me burn." "I came because your son called my daughter begging for help, because your children are scared for their mother, because this needs to end before someone gets hurt." "It's already ended," Harold laughed bitterly. "You won. You took everything." "I took back what was mine," my father corrected calmly. "What you're losing now you did to yourself. But Margaret doesn't deserve this. Let her go, Harold. Face what's coming with whatever dignity you have left." Ryan and Stephanie had arrived, standing with us in the crowd of law enforcement and media. Stephanie was crying silently. Ryan looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. "Dad, please," Ryan called out. "Let Mom go. This isn't her fault." "Not her fault." Harold appeared at a window, disheveled and wild-eyed. "She pushed for that prenup. She insisted we control everything. Harold," Margaret's voice sharp even in crisis. "Stop talking. The lawyers said—" "The lawyers are gone," Harold roared. "They abandoned us the moment the feds showed up. 30 years of fees, and they run at the first sign of trouble." My father raised the megaphone again. "Harold, you have one chance here. Come out peacefully, let Margaret leave safely, and face this with whatever honor you can salvage. Or continue this breakdown and lose even the possibility of mercy from the courts." "Mercy?" Harold laughed again, the sound unhinged. "From the man whose technology I stole, from the daughter I tried to trap, from the system I've been gaming for decades." "From your children," my father said simply, "who are standing here begging you to stop, who'll have to live with whatever you do next for the rest of their lives." That seemed to penetrate Harold's rage. He looked past us to where Ryan and Stephanie stood, saw their faces, their fear. "My children," he said more quietly, "my legacy." "We're not your legacy, Dad," Ryan said, his voice carrying without amplification. "We're people. Your son and daughter who just want their mother safe. Please." For a long moment, Harold stood frozen at the window. Then he disappeared from view. The front door opened slowly, and Margaret walked out head high despite her smeared makeup and rumpled clothes. She walked past all of us without a word, straight to a waiting police car. Harold appeared in the doorway looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The titan of industry who'd terrorized boardrooms and destroyed competitors was just a broken man in a wrinkled suit. "I built an empire," he said to no one in particular. "I built it from nothing." "You built it on something that wasn't yours," my father said not unkindly, "and that foundation was always going to crumble." The police moved in cuffs ready. Harold didn't resist. As they led him away, he looked at Ryan and Stephanie one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, the words seeming to surprise him. "I taught you all the wrong things." Then he was gone, another fallen king, learning that empires built on lies always fall. Ryan and Stephanie stood lost in the crowd. Their parents were heading to custody. Their fortune was frozen. Their name was poison. Everything they'd known was gone. "What do we do now?" Stephanie asked her brother. "We start over," Ryan said quietly. "We learn to be different, better." He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Genuine humility. "Thank you," he said, "for calling your father, for caring enough to help even after everything." "I didn't do it for you," I said honestly. "I did it because breaking the cycle of cruelty has to start somewhere." My father approached Ryan and Stephanie. You both have chosen to cooperate with authorities. That takes courage. If you need references for honest work when this is over, come see me. I believe in second chances for those who earn them. They nodded, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness from the man their father had wronged. As we prepared to leave, Patricia Chen approached with news. The board of Whitmore Industries just voted. They're accepting Sterling Enterprises' buyout offer to avoid complete collapse. Mr. Sterling, you'll own the company by week's end. What will you do with it? I asked my father. He smiled, the expression holding both satisfaction and purpose. What I always intended if I ever got it back, transform it into something worthwhile, ethical business practices, fair wages, and a large charitable division. Run by someone who understands the value of giving back, he added, looking at me meaningfully. Daddy, no, I have my work, which you can continue. But imagine the resources you'd have access to, the good you could do with Whitmore Industries' infrastructure turned toward charity instead of greed. The irony was perfect. The company that had tried to cage me would become my platform for helping others. Think about it, he said gently. No pressure, but the option is there. As we drove away from the estate, I watched the media circus in the rearview mirror. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream about Harold's arrest, Margaret's complicity, the complete collapse of a dynasty. But I was thinking about the future, about literacy programs funded by Whitmore millions, about women's shelters supported by an empire built on controlling women, about turning 30 years of theft into lifetimes of giving. You know what Mom would say? I asked my father. That the best revenge is a life well lived, that the best justice is transformation, taking something built on cruelty and making it kind. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Then let's transform it, together. My phone buzzed with messages from the Literacy Center. The children were asking when Ms. Della would read to them again. Normal life calling me back. But maybe normal was about to change. Maybe my small life of small goods was about to become something bigger, not because I'd married into wealth, but because I'd refused to, and in doing so, inherited the chance to make that wealth meaningful. The Whitmore Empire had fallen. From its ashes, something better would rise. 2 weeks after the wedding, I was settling back into my routine when Ryan appeared at the Literacy Center. I was preparing for the afternoon reading session when I saw him through the window, standing uncertainly by the entrance. He looked different. The entitled prince of retail was gone, replaced by someone in a simple button-down and jeans. The designer watch was missing. The perfectly styled hair was now naturally tousled, but it was his eyes that had changed the most. They held humility where arrogance once lived. You can't be here, I said, stepping outside to prevent him from disrupting the children's space. This is my workplace. I know, I'm sorry, I needed to talk to you, really talk, without lawyers or media or family drama. We have nothing to talk about, Ryan. Please, he said, and the desperation in his voice made me pause. 5 minutes, then I'll leave and never bother you again. I promise. Against my better judgment, I gestured to a bench in the small park across the street. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, creating patterns that reminded me of happier times. You look good, he said as we sat. Happy, like yourself again. I was always myself, I corrected. You just wanted me to be someone else. He nodded, accepting the criticism without defense. You're right. I see that now. I've had a lot of time to think these past 2 weeks. About who I was, who I am, who I could have been. And I realize I threw away the only real thing in my life. He stared at his hands clasped tightly in his lap. You loved me, Della. Actually loved me. Not my money, not my family's status, not what I could buy you, just me. And I couldn't even recognize how rare that was. I loved who I thought you were, I said carefully, but that person might never have existed. He did, Ryan insisted. Those moments at the charity events, reading to kids, bringing you coffee, that was real. That was the truest I've ever been. but I was too weak to stay that person when my family applied pressure. A group of children ran past, laughing and chasing bubbles someone was blowing nearby. Ryan watched them with something like wonder. "I've been testifying," he continued, "telling the FBI everything about the bribes, the blackmail, the companies we destroyed. Did you know my father kept a ledger like a trophy list of everyone he'd crushed?" "I'm not surprised," I said. "I gave them names, dates, amounts. Stephanie's doing the same. We're trying to make amends, though I know it can never be enough." "Why are you telling me this?" He turned to face me fully, and I saw tears threatening in his eyes. "Because I need you to know that I finally understand what you tried to tell me. That wealth without integrity is worthless. That love based on contracts isn't love at all. That I had something precious and I let fear and greed destroy it. Understanding doesn't change what happened," I said gently but firmly. "I know, God, I know." He rubbed his face with his hands. "I keep replaying that night in the study. If I'd just stood up for you just once. If I'd told them the prenup was wrong, that you deserved respect, that I loved you more than their money. But you didn't." "But I didn't," he agreed miserably. "And now I've lost everything. Not just the money. That's gone anyway with the investigations. But you. The future we could have had. The life we planned." "The life you planned included controlling me," I reminded him. "Monitoring my friendships, limiting my career, dictating our children's lives." "That wasn't my plan," he protested, then stopped himself. "No, you're right. I let it become my plan. I stood by while they wrote those clauses. I told myself it was just paperwork, that our life wouldn't really be like that." How could it be anything else when it started with coercion and threats? He had no answer for that. We sat in silence, watching life flow past us. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by prenups and dynasties and stolen fortunes. "I've gotten a job," he said suddenly. "Can you believe it? My first real job. I'm working at a nonprofit that helps small businesses navigate legal requirements. The pay is, well, it's humbling, but I'm actually helping people instead of destroying them. That's good, Ryan, really." "Della." He shifted to face me again, his expression painfully earnest. "I know I have no right to ask this. I know I destroyed everything with my cowardice. But is there any chance, any at all, that someday you could forgive me? Not take me back," he added quickly. "I know that's impossible, but just forgive me." I thought about his question about the man sitting next to me who looked so different from the one who'd shrugged off his family's cruelty 2 weeks ago. Growth was possible. Change was possible. But some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt. "I forgive you, Ryan," I said finally. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger would only let your family continue to control my life." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you, that's more than I deserve." "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," I continued. "It doesn't mean we can be friends or that what happened was okay. It just means I'm choosing to let go and move forward." He nodded, understanding if not accepting. "What about, could we at least stay in touch? I'd like to know you're okay, that you're happy. You can follow the Literacy Center's newsletter if you want updates on my work, but personal contact, no. That chapter is closed." He stood abruptly, as if staying seated would make him plead more than he already had. "I should let you get back. The kids are probably waiting." I stood too ready for this conversation to end, but he wasn't quite finished. "I dream about it sometimes," he said quietly. "The life we could have had if I'd been brave. Small apartment instead of the estate. Real friends instead of society contacts. Children who knew they were loved for themselves, not their last name. You reading to them every night while I cook dinner. I've been learning to cook. Did I tell you that I can make that lasagna you taught me now?" "Ryan, stop." "I know, I'm sorry. I just wanted you to know that I finally see what I gave up, what I chose money over, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." He took a step away, then turned back one last time. Your father's announcement about the charitable foundation using Whitmore Industries to fund education and literacy programs nationwide, that's perfect. My family's greed transformed into your generosity. It's poetic justice. It's just justice, I corrected, making things right after 30 years of wrong. Will you be running it? Eventually. I'm finishing my current programs first, but yes, I'll be directing the charitable division. You'll be amazing at it, he said with genuine admiration. Those kids, all the people you'll help, they're lucky to have you. I was lucky to have you even if I was too stupid to realize it. He walked away, then shoulders slumped but steps steady. I watched him go, feeling an unexpected mix of sadness and relief. The Ryan who'd just left was closer to the man I'd fallen in love with than the one who'd stood by while his family attacked me. But timing was everything, and his growth had come too late. Ms. Della, a small voice called out. Are you coming? It's story time. I turned to see Lucy, one of my regular attendees, bouncing impatiently at the center's door. Behind her, more children were gathering books clutched in eager hands. I'm coming, sweetheart. I called back, leaving the ghosts of what might have been on that park bench. Inside, surrounded by children who just wanted someone to make funny voices and bring characters to life, I felt the last of the Whitmore weight lift from my shoulders. Ryan would go on to build his new life, hopefully becoming the man he should have been all along, but it would be without me. I opened The Paper Bag Princess, a story about a princess who saves herself and decides the prince isn't worth the trouble. The children giggled at my dragon voice, gasped at the princess's cleverness, and cheered when she walked into the sunset alone but triumphant. Ms. Della, Lucy asked after the story, why didn't the princess marry the prince? Don't all stories end with weddings? I smiled at her innocent question. Not all stories, sweetie. Sometimes the best ending is when the princess realizes she's complete all by herself. She doesn't need a prince to have a happy ending. Like you, another child piped up. You were on TV in a princess dress, but you didn't get married. Exactly like me, I agreed. And you know what, I'm happier now than I would have been in that big castle. They seemed satisfied with that answer, already reaching for the next book. As I settled in to read about brave knights and clever rabbits and kind bears, I thought about Ryan's parting words. He was right about one thing. I was lucky. Not because I'd escaped the Whitmore trap, but because I'd remembered who I was in time to avoid it. These children, this work, this life I'd built with my own hands, this was my happy ending. And unlike fairy tales, it was real, sustaining, and entirely my own. The past was done. Ryan would find his path, hopefully toward redemption. The Whitmores would face justice, and I would keep reading stories, planning fundraisers, and soon directing a foundation that would transform stolen wealth into shared opportunity. Not all princesses needed princes. Some just needed the courage to write their own stories. And mine was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the wedding that wasn't. The Whitmore estate, once a symbol of power and prestige, had been transformed into something entirely different. Today it would host its final event under the Whitmore name before being converted into a nonprofit conference center. I stood at the entrance not in a wedding dress but in professional attire, wearing a badge that read Della Sterling Romano, Director of Community Initiatives, Sterling Whitmore Foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd entered this estate as a bride-to-be and was returning as the executor of its transformation. The media's here in full force, my assistant James informed me. They're calling this the ultimate revenge story. It's not revenge, I corrected gently. It's redemption, making something good from something that caused so much harm. The gardens where my wedding should have occurred had been redesigned. Gone were the ostentatious displays of wealth. In their place stood educational stations, literacy corners, and spaces designed for community gatherings. The house itself would become a training center for nonprofit leaders, its many rooms repurposed from showcasing wealth to building community service. Ms. Sterling Romano. A familiar voice made me turn. Madison Whitmore, now Madison Chen, having reclaimed her maiden name, approached with a warm smile. She looked like a different person, relaxed, genuine, glowing with newfound purpose. "Madison, you made it. I wouldn't miss this for anything," she said, gesturing to the transformed space. "Watching this place become something positive. It's like watching my own transformation made physical." She'd used her divorce settlement to establish an art therapy program for abuse survivors. Her paintings, dark at first, but increasingly filled with light, had even gained gallery representation. "Have you seen him?" she asked carefully. I knew who she meant. Not yet, but he RSVP'd yes. Ryan had been invited as part of our commitment to restorative justice. All former Whitmore family members who'd cooperated with authorities and shown genuine remorse were welcome to witness the transformation of their former empire. As if summoned by our conversation, I spotted him across the garden. He stood with Stephanie, both dressed, simply observing the changes with expressions I couldn't quite read. When our eyes met, he offered a small nod. Acknowledgement without intrusion. I returned it, then refocused on the day's agenda. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began my speech an hour later, standing where the wedding altar should have been. "Welcome to the last day of the Whitmore estate as we've known it, and the first day of its new purpose." The crowd included charity leaders, educators, former Whitmore employees who'd been rehired under fair conditions, and members of the media. But most importantly, it included beneficiaries of our programs. Children clutching new books, small business owners who'd received grants, families who'd found shelter in properties converted from Whitmore Investment Holdings. This estate was built on stolen innovation and maintained through decades of exploitation. I continued believing in the power of truth. But buildings aren't guilty of their creators' crimes. Spaces can be redeemed. Wealth can be redirected. And that's what we're doing today. I outlined the Foundation's first-year achievements: 50 literacy centers, established 200 small businesses, supported 1,000 families housed, all funded by the fortune built on my father's stolen work, now returned to serve the community Harold Whitmore had taken from. My father, William Sterling, waited 30 years for justice, I said as he joined me on the platform, but he taught me that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration, making things right, building better futures from broken pasts. The crowd applauded as my father spoke about forgiveness, transformation, and the power of using wealth for good. But I noticed Ryan hanging on every word, his expression a mix of shame and hope. After the speeches, as people toured the transformed spaces, he approached cautiously. "It's incredible," he said simply, "what you've done here, what you've made from my family's ruin." "Ruin implies destruction without purpose," I replied. "This is reconstruction. Your family's empire fell, but its resources are building something better." Stephanie joined us, looking healthier than I'd ever seen her. "I'm starting social work school in the fall," she announced, specializing in family dynamics and financial abuse. "Turns out, living it gives you insight into preventing it." "That's wonderful, Stephanie." She smiled, then surprised me by asking, "Would the Foundation consider internship partnerships? I'd love to learn from programs that are actually making a difference." "Send me your proposal," I offered. "We're always looking for people who understand the complexities of economic abuse." As they moved on to explore other areas, I found myself standing where my father had revealed the truth 6 months ago. The spot had been transformed into a meditation garden, complete with a small plaque, "Truth sets us free, but kindness helps us heal." Ms. Sterling Romano. A young woman approached nervously. "I'm Sarah Walsh from the Wall Street Journal, the one who broke the story wide open, I remember. I wanted to thank you. Your live stream, your courage in speaking truth. It inspired a whole series on financial abuse in wealthy families. We've helped dozens of people find resources to escape similar situations." "That's the point," I said. "Breaking cycles, creating ripples of change." The afternoon progressed with tours, presentations, and testimonials from program beneficiaries. Former Whitmore employees spoke about fair wages and ethical business practices. Charity partners discussed sustainable funding models. Children from our literacy programs performed a play they'd written about kindness conquering greed. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the same windows that had once witnessed my imprisonment, I stood in the blue guest room, now converted to a counseling space for financial abuse survivors. Full circle. My father appeared in the doorway. Something like that. I touched the window where paint had once sealed it shut. Now it opened easily, letting in fresh air and the sounds of positive change. Any regrets? He asked gently. I thought about it honestly, about how it happened. Yes, people were hurt, lives disrupted, but about the outcome, no. This is better than any traditional happy ending. Through the window, I could see Ryan and Stephanie helping load books into a van bound for one of our literacy centers. He'd volunteered for the physical work, no fanfare, no seeking attention, just quiet service. He's trying, my father observed. They all are in their own ways. Harold was serving his sentence teaching financial literacy to fellow inmates. Margaret, under house arrest, had started corresponding with women trapped in similar gilded cages. Consequences don't prevent redemption. Your mother would be so proud, my father said. You took something that could have destroyed you and turned it into purpose. As the event wound down, I walked through the estate one last time as it existed in Whitmore form. Tomorrow, contractors would begin the final conversions. The chandeliers would be replaced with practical lighting. The gilt would be painted over. The ostentation would give way to functionality. Della. Ryan stood by the entrance, clearly working up courage for something. I paused, waiting. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, for including us today, for showing us what we could have been building all along, and for being the person who could see past revenge to something better. Everyone deserves a chance to witness transformation, I replied, even especially those who need it most. He smiled sadly. I know I said I wouldn't contact you again, and I won't. But seeing this, seeing what you've built from our ashes, I'm glad I loved you, even if I was too weak to honor that love. You've shown me what strength really looks like. Strength looks like a lot of things, I said, including admitting wrongs and working to right them. Keep going, Ryan. Your story doesn't end with your family's fall. I left him there in the entrance where I'd once entered as a naive bride-to-be, but I wasn't running away this time. I was walking towards something, a future I'd built myself, a purpose born from pain, a life that honored both my parents' values and my own hard-won wisdom. The estate gates closed behind me for the last time in their current form. Tomorrow they'd open to welcome communities instead of excluding them. The Whitmore name would fade, but what rose in its place would last, a testament to the power of transforming privilege into purpose, theft into philanthropy, control into compassion. In my car, I found a package on the passenger seat. Inside was a simple leather journal and a note in Ryan's handwriting. For your next chapter, may it be everything ours couldn't be. R. I set it aside, neither accepting nor rejecting the gesture. Some gifts, like forgiveness, were complicated. But the sentiment was clear. He understood that my story continued without him, and he was grateful to have played even a broken part in leading me to my purpose. As I drove home to my small apartment, which I'd kept despite now having resources for more, I thought about fairy tales and real life. In stories, the princess either married the prince or defeated the villain. In real life, sometimes she did neither. Sometimes she transformed the kingdom itself, turning palaces into schools and dungeons into gardens. The wedding that didn't happen had become something far more powerful, a beginning that needed no ending, a transformation that rippled outward, touching lives Harold Whitmore had never bothered to consider. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new programs to implement, new lives to touch. But tonight, I was simply Della Sterling Romano, who'd walked into a trap and emerged with the keys to free others. And that was better than any happily ever after I could have imagined. 1 year later, I stood in my office at the Sterling Whitmore Foundation, looking out at a view I never could have imagined. Not because of the skyline or the prestigious address, but because of what I could see happening below a job fair for formerly incarcerated individuals, organized in what used to be Whitmore Industries' exclusive parking garage. The Times wants a follow-up interview, James informed me, entering with a stack of messages. 1 year later, where are they now, that sort of thing? Schedule it, I decided. But make sure they understand it's not about gossip, it's about the work we're doing. The past year had been a whirlwind of transformation. The foundation had exceeded every projection, helping thousands of families while dismantling the predatory practices that had built the Whitmore fortune. But more interesting were the personal transformations. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. To my surprise, it was Stephanie Whitmore. She'd been interning with us for 6 months, but usually communicated through her supervisor. Della, do you have a moment? She looked nervous but determined, reminding me of myself standing up to her family. Of course, sit. She perched on the edge of the chair, gathering courage. I've been accepted to Columbia's social work program, full scholarship. Stephanie, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Thanks, but that's not why I'm here. She pulled out a folder, hands slightly trembling. I've been working on something, a program proposal for children of white-collar criminals. I raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. Growing up, Whitmore meant growing up with warped values, she explained. We were taught that money equaled worth, that power meant permission to hurt others. When that worldview collapses, you're left with nothing. No moral compass, no sense of identity beyond your bank account. And you want to create a program for kids in that situation. She nodded eagerly. Counseling, mentorship, education about ethical wealth. Maybe if someone had intervened when Ryan and I were young, shown us another way. She trailed off, then straightened. I can't change the past, but maybe I can help others avoid our mistakes. I read through her proposal, impressed by its thoughtfulness and personal insight. This is excellent work, Stephanie. Let's develop it further. I think you're onto something important. Her face lit up. The first genuine joy I'd seen from her. As she left clutching the folder with new purpose, I reflected on the ripple effects of change. Stephanie was becoming someone her parents never would have recognized, thoughtful, empathetic, driven by purpose rather than profit. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, then noticed the area code, Rikers Island. Ms. Sterling Romano, this is Harold Whitmore. I'm teaching my financial literacy class today and wanted you to know. We've helped 12 inmates prepare for job interviews. They have hope now. Thank you for not letting my knowledge go to waste. HWW. I stared at the message, processing the surreal reality of Harold Whitmore thanking me for anything. Prison had done what decades of wealth couldn't taught him: humility. Interesting day. My father appeared in my doorway, his monthly visit to review foundation progress. Harold texted, from prison, to thank me. His eyebrows rose. Wonders never cease. How's his program doing? Actually, very well. The warden says he's one of their most effective instructors. Turns out, explaining how you committed financial crimes makes you good at teaching others to avoid them. We reviewed the foundation's numbers, the expanding programs, the lives touched, but my father seemed distracted. What is it? I finally asked. I've been thinking about forgiveness, he said slowly. Real forgiveness, not just moving on, but actual reconciliation. With Harold, he served his time. He's teaching others. He's accepted responsibility. My father gazed out the window. Your mother always said holding grudges was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. What are you thinking? When he's released next year, I'm considering offering him a position, consultant on financial crime prevention, use his expertise legitimately. I nearly choked on my coffee. You want to hire Harold Whitmore? I want to complete the circle of redemption, he corrected. He stole from me, built an empire on it, lost everything, and found humility. If we're truly about transformation, shouldn't that include him? It was a radical thought, but then everything about this journey had been radical. What about Ryan? I asked carefully. He inquires about employment every few months. My father studied me. That's your call, not mine. He's qualified, his volunteer record is impeccable, and his legal aid work has helped dozens of small businesses. But he's also your ex-fiancé who betrayed you. Only you can decide if professional interaction is possible. I'd been avoiding this decision for months. Ryan had rebuilt himself impressively, working legal aid, living modestly, volunteering weekends at literacy programs. By all accounts, he'd become the man he'd pretended to be when we met. But was that enough? I need time to think, I said. Of course, no rush. Transformation takes time. He smiled. Speaking of which, Madison's art exhibition opens tonight. Are you going? Wouldn't miss it. Madison's journey from trapped wife to celebrated artist had been remarkable. Her paintings depicting the stages of escape from emotional abuse had resonated with thousands. That evening, the gallery buzzed with appreciation for Madison's work. I stood before a painting titled The Signature, which showed a woman's hand signing a document while chains formed from the ink. It was powerful, painful, and ultimately triumphant as the chains shattered in the final panel. Della. Madison embraced me warmly. Thank you for coming. These are incredible, I said, meaning it. You've transformed pain into purpose. I learned from the best, she smiled. How's the foundation? I heard Stephanie's developing something special. We chatted about programs and progress, but I noticed her glancing toward the door. Following her gaze, I saw Marcus enter alone and hesitant. He asked to come, Madison explained quietly. First contact since the divorce. He's been in therapy working on himself. Says he wants to apologize properly. And you're okay with that? I'm strong enough to hear it now, she said. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or reconciling, but it might mean allowing someone to acknowledge the harm they caused. I watched Marcus approach his ex-wife with obvious trepidation, saw Madison's gracious but bounded reception, observed their careful conversation by her strongest paintings. It was awkward, painful, but somehow necessary. Ms. Sterling Romano. I turned to find Ryan behind me, looking uncertain. I'm sorry I didn't know you'd be here. I can leave. It's Madison's night, I said calmly. We can both be adults and support her. He relaxed slightly. Your speech last month at the Small Business Summit, it was inspiring. You've helped so many people find their footing. That's the goal, I replied, keeping things professional. We stood awkwardly for a moment, then he said quietly, I volunteer at the Riverside Literacy Center now, the same kids you used to read to. They ask about you sometimes. Do they? Despite myself, I smiled thinking of those children. Lucy specifically. She's reading at grade level now thanks to your programs. She wants to be a teacher. He paused. Like you taught her teachers could change lives. Before I could respond, Stephanie appeared with her boyfriend, a public school teacher she'd met during her internship. The contrast to the entitled princess of a year ago was striking. Della, did you see Madison's piece about breaking contracts? It's brilliant. She turned to her brother. Ryan, I didn't know you were coming. Last-minute decision, he said. Madison's work deserves support. I excused myself to view more paintings, but couldn't help noticing the Whitmore siblings throughout the evening, no longer imperious and demanding, but uncertain and trying. They were rebuilding themselves just as the foundation was rebuilding their father's empire. Later, as the evening wound down, I found myself on the gallery's balcony enjoying a moment of quiet. The city sparkled below, full of stories of rise and fall, redemption and revenge. Hiding. My father joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. Reflecting, I corrected, accepting the glass, on how much can change in a year, and how much more can change in the years to come, he added. Have you thought about what we discussed? About Ryan potentially working for the foundation. I sipped my champagne, organizing my thoughts. I think I think everyone deserves a chance to contribute positively. If he's qualified and you believe he'd be an asset, I won't stand in the way, but I'd want him in a different department, professional distance. Fair enough. And Harold, that's your forgiveness to offer, not mine. If you can work with the man who stole from you, knowing he's genuinely changed, that's powerful. My father smiled. You've become quite the philosopher. I've had good teachers, I replied, and a year of seeing how transformation really works. As we headed back inside, I caught sight of all the players in this drama scattered through the gallery. Madison triumphant in her artistic rebirth, Marcus humbled and seeking redemption, Stephanie purposeful and driven by newfound values, Ryan quietly supportive and clearly changed, even Harold absent but present in the way his children were rewriting their stories. No fairy tale ending, I murmured. No, my father agreed. Something better. Real life with all its complications and possibilities. The foundation's car waited outside to take me home, still to my small apartment, though I could afford anywhere now. But that apartment represented my authentic self, the person who'd walked away from a gilded cage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new programs to launch new lives to touch. The Sterling Whitmore Foundation was just getting started. The literacy programs were expanding nationally. The small business initiatives were creating jobs. The housing projects were sheltering families. And somewhere in Rikers, Harold Whitmore was teaching inmates about financial literacy. In legal aid offices, Ryan was helping David beat Goliath. In Columbia classrooms, Stephanie would soon learn to heal families broken by greed. In galleries and therapy offices, Madison and others were turning survival into art. The wedding that didn't happen had become a catalyst for change beyond anything I could have imagined. Not a fairy tale, but something rarer, a true story of transformation, spreading outward in ripples that would touch lives for generations. As I entered my apartment, I noticed the leather journal Ryan had given me a year ago, still untouched on my shelf. On impulse, I opened it and wrote, Chapter 1. The real work begins tomorrow. Because this wasn't an ending. It was a foundation for whatever came next, built on truth instead of theft, purpose instead of profit, and the radical belief that anyone, even Whitmores, could change. The princess hadn't married the prince or slayed the dragon. She'd done something harder and more lasting. She'd transformed the kingdom itself, one choice at a time. And that was a happily ever after worth writing. 5 years had passed since the wedding that changed everything. I stood in my office looking out at a view that still amazed me, not of city skylines, but of the community center that had replaced the old Whitmore Industries building. Children played in the courtyard below while their parents attended job training in what used to be executive boardrooms. The documentary crew is here, James announced. They're ready when you are. Today marked a milestone, the release of The Wedding That Wasn't, a documentary that had followed all of us through our transformations. I'd agreed to participate not for publicity, but because our story had inspired legislative changes in prenuptial law and financial abuse recognition. In the conference room, I found familiar faces gathered for the final group interview. Madison, now a renowned artist whose work graced museums. Stephanie, having completed her master's and running our youth intervention program. Even Harold, out on supervised release and working as our senior consultant on fraud prevention. Time had humbled him profoundly. His hair was gray, his posture bent, but his eyes held something they'd never had before: genuine remorse and purpose. Thank you all for participating, the director began. This final interview is about reflection, where you've been, where you are, where you're going. As we settled into chairs, the door opened once more. Ryan entered, and my heart no longer skipped or sank. Time had transformed that pain into something neutral, professional. He'd joined the foundation 2 years ago in our legal department after proving himself through 3 years of consistent volunteer work and advocacy. We maintained careful boundaries, different departments, minimal interaction, but had found a functioning professional rhythm. Let's start with you, Harold, the director said. 5 years ago, you built an empire on stolen innovation. Today, you teach others how to spot and prevent similar theft. How do you reconcile that? Harold's voice was steady but weighted. I don't reconcile it. I live with it. Every day I wake up knowing I built my life on someone else's dreams. William Sterling showed me more grace than I deserved by allowing me to use my knowledge for good. I can't undo the theft, but I can prevent others. Your program has helped prosecute 17 cases of corporate fraud, the director noted. 17 too few, Harold replied, but it's a start. The questions continued around the room. Madison spoke about art as healing, showing slides of her latest exhibition on breaking generational cycles. Stephanie discussed her program that had helped over 200 children of white-collar criminals find healthier paths. Ryan, the director, turned to him. You've perhaps had the most dramatic transformation, from heir to an empire to legal aid attorney to nonprofit executive. What drives you? Ryan glanced briefly at me before answering. Shame initially, then purpose. I spent my first 28 years taking. Now I try to give. It doesn't balance the scales, but it's the only equation that makes sense. And Della, the director, finally faced me. You could have had revenge. Instead, you chose restoration. Why? I considered my words carefully. Revenge would have left me trapped in their story. Restoration let me write my own. Yes, the Whitmores tried to cage me, but destroying them would have just created more pain, transforming their resources into community good that creates endless possibilities. The foundation has helped over 50,000 families. The director read from her notes. Literacy programs in 40 states, small business incubators in 15 cities. Is this what you imagined? I imagined reading to children in a small community center. I laughed. This grew beyond any dream. But it's not about me. It's about systemic change, breaking cycles, creating opportunities. The interview continued for another hour, touching on forgiveness, justice, and the complexity of transformation. When it ended, we stood awkwardly in the conference room, this strange family bonded by trauma and redemption. Drink, Harold suggested tentatively, not to celebrate, just to acknowledge. Surprisingly, we all agreed. At a quiet restaurant nearby, we raised glasses of water and wine to survival change and the strange paths life takes. I owe you all apologies, Harold said quietly. Madison for what my family put you through. Stephanie Ryan for raising you in poison and calling it love. Della. His voice broke slightly. For trying to do to you what I'd done to your father. There aren't enough words. Then don't use words, I suggested. Use actions. Keep teaching. Keep preventing others from following your path. As the evening progressed, I found myself in unexpected conversation with Ryan at the bar while others mingled. We'd carefully avoided personal interaction for 2 years, but somehow the documentary had shifted something. Do you ever think about it? He asked quietly. What life would have been if I'd been different then? No, I answered honestly. That way lies madness. I think about what is not what might have been. Fair enough. He studied his glass. I'm seeing someone. A teacher from Stephanie's program. She knows the whole story, understands the work I'm trying to do. I'm glad, I said, meaning it. Everyone deserves a chance at real love. What about you? James mentioned someone. David. He runs one of our small business programs. We've been together about a year. I smiled, thinking of the kind man who'd entered my life with no agenda except genuine partnership. He proposed last month. Ryan's face showed a complex mix of emotions before settling on something like peace. Congratulations, really. You deserve happiness. We all do, I said, even reformed Whitmores. We returned to the group where Stephanie was showing photos from her program's graduation. Young people who'd grown up in families destroyed by white-collar crime, now heading to college, or careers with healthier perspectives on success. This one, she pointed proudly, is starting at NYU in the fall, wants to be a prosecutor. Says she's going to put future Harolds in jail before they can hurt anyone. Good, Harold said firmly. That's exactly what should happen. As the evening ended, we went our separate ways, but before leaving, Harold approached me one more time. I've been working on something, he said, pulling out an envelope. With my lawyers. It's a fund for the specific families my theft hurt 30 years ago. We tracked down 17 small investors who lost everything when I stole Williams' innovation. This sets up restitution payments. I looked at the documentation. Harold, this is significant money. Not enough. Never enough. But it's what I can do with what I have left. He handed me the envelope. Will the foundation administer it? Ensure it reaches the right people? Of course. He nodded and walked away, shoulders bent with the weight of genuine accountability. It was a far cry from the man who'd tried to force me to sign my life away. The next morning, I met David for coffee before work. He'd seen the documentary preview and wrapped me in a warm hug. Heavy stuff, he said. You okay? More than okay, I assured him. It's closure in a way, seeing how far we've all come. Even Ryan, David, knew our history but had never shown jealousy, only understanding. Especially Ryan. The man he is now could never have done what he did then. Growth is possible for anyone. David smiled. Speaking of growth, the venue called. They have an opening next spring. What do you think? I laughed. A spring wedding at the Botanical Garden with only 50 guests and absolutely no prenups. Exactly as we discussed. Though I do have one contract requirement. Oh, he pulled out a worn children's book. You have to promise to read bedtime stories to our future kids, with voices and everything. I kissed him right there in the coffee shop. Deal. That afternoon, I returned to where it all began, the Community Literacy Center. The children who'd been my escape during the Whitmore drama were older now, but new faces had taken their places. Lucy, now 13 and reading voraciously, helped me with the younger kids. Ms. Della, she said as we cleaned up after story time, my teacher says you were in a documentary about a wedding. A wedding that didn't happen, I confirmed. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that lead you away from what you thought you wanted. Like in The Paper Bag Princess, I smiled at her reference. Exactly like that. Sometimes the princess realizes she's better off without the prince. But you're getting married now, right, to Mr. David? I am, but this time it's as equals. No castles, no contracts, no cages, just two people choosing to build something together. She seemed satisfied with that answer, helping me shelve books with careful hands. As we worked, I thought about the cycles we'd broken and the new ones we'd started. The Whitmore empire had fallen, but in its place stood something stronger, a network of programs, opportunities, and second chances. Harold taught accountability. Madison created beauty from pain. Stephanie guided young people away from their parents' mistakes. Ryan advocated for those without power, and I got to wake up every day and direct resources toward real change. My phone buzzed with a message from my father. Proud of you, princess. Mom would be too. That evening, as David and I planned our simple wedding, I pulled out the leather journal Ryan had given me 5 years ago. I'd written only that one line, but now I knew how to continue. Chapter 2. The real happily ever after isn't in endings, but in beginnings, in the choice to wake up each day and build something better than what came before, in the understanding that love isn't a contract, but a conversation renewed daily through actions both small and large. I wrote about the children learning to read the businesses, finding their footing, the families rebuilding after financial ruin. I wrote about Harold's restitution fund and Stephanie's graduating class, about Madison's art speaking for those still finding their voices, about Ryan's quiet dedication to justice, performed without fanfare or expectation of forgiveness. And I wrote about David, who saw my whole story and loved me not despite it, but because of it, who understood that strength comes from surviving storms, not avoiding them. The documentary would air next month, sharing our story with the world. But the real story continued every day in smaller ways, in every child who learned to read, every family that found stable housing, every person who chose transformation over stagnation. The wedding that didn't happen had taught me that the best love stories aren't about grand gestures or perfect princes. They're about people brave enough to show up as themselves, flawed and striving, and build something real together. As I closed the journal, David called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready, and I finally mastered your grandmother's lasagna recipe." I smiled, remembering Ryan's fumbling attempts at that same dish years ago. But this wasn't about comparison. This was about moving forward, about choosing joy over bitterness, purpose over revenge, love over fear. Coming. I called back, leaving the past in the journal and walking toward my future. The princess had indeed saved herself. But more importantly, she'd learned that real happiness comes not from being saved, but from building a life worth living, one choice at a time, surrounded by people who choose growth over comfort, truth over fairy tales, and love over contracts. And that was better than any storybook ending could ever be. I opened our apartment door. Not a castle, just a home filled with laughter and burned experiments from David's cooking adventures. This was real life, messy, imperfect, and absolutely perfect in its authenticity. "By the way," David said as I entered the kitchen, "the Literacy Center called. They want to name the new wing after you." "After us," I corrected. "The Sterling Romano Family Reading Room." "Family," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." So did I. A family built on choice, not contracts. A legacy of literacy, not greed. A future written by our own hands, one page at a time. The wedding that didn't happen had been the greatest gift, not because it freed me from the Whitmores, but because it freed me to discover who I really was. And who I was, it turned out, was exactly who I was meant to be. As I share this story with you, I want to leave you with this thought. Your worth is not determined by what others are willing to pay for your compliance. True love doesn't come with terms and conditions. Real partnership means standing together, not one person kneeling while the other holds the keys. If you've ever been asked to sign away your rights for love, if you've been locked in a room, literal or metaphorical, until you agreed to demands, if someone has threatened to destroy you for not complying with their vision of who you should be, know this: you deserve better. The castle might look beautiful from the outside, but if it's a prison, it's still a cage. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, even if that means walking alone for a while. What matters most to you? Authentic love or contractual obligation? Have you ever had to choose between being yourself and being what someone else demanded? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please share it with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't negotiable, that love shouldn't require legal documentation, and that sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen. Like this video if you believe in love without contracts, and subscribe for more stories about choosing courage over comfort. Remember, you are not what others try to make you. You are who you choose to become. Thank you for joining me on this journey from almost bride to foundation director, from trap to free, from fairy tale to reality. May your own story be filled with authentic love, genuine partnership, and the courage to say no when yes would cost you everything. Until next time, remember, write your own story. The pen is always in your hands.